Wildlife photographer and naturalist Sean Miller specializes in capturing the flora and fauna of Okinawa, Japan. Equally at home on land and underwater, Sean has documented rare and endemic species from birds and reptiles to nudibranches and shells. Sean specializes in creating motion in still photographs, fluorescence photography, environmental awareness, and the protection of endangered species. Sean is a long-term resident of Okinawa whose purpose of achievement drives him to get that once-in-a-lifetime photograph of never-before-seen animal behavior. His work has been featured in the Smithsonian National Museum of Natural History, National Geographic, World Wildlife Fund, and Blue Planet 2. He is best known for his powerful project, Crabs with Beach Trash Homes. Cinezona milleri, Hemilianaria seanmilleri, and Calliostoma seani are species named after the wildlife photographer and naturalist Sean Miller for his continued support in malacological research. Learn more about the beautiful animals of the Ryukyu Islands and Sean Miller's work at Okinawa Nature Photography. Please welcome Sean Miller.
The Plight of the Blueberry Hermit Crab by Sean Miller. Greetings from Okinawa, Japan. In 2014, I started finding many hermit crabs adapting with plastic. So I decided to start the project, Crabs with Beach Trash Homes. I even had friends and family searching for them as well. I was highly motivated to document as many as possible. I spent most of the time documenting the hermit crabs on beaches with an abundance of trash. The more trash on the shore, the more crabs I seemed to find adapting with their waste. Most of the common items washed ashore were single-use items, such as styrofoam, medicine, prescriptions, twist-top caps, glass bottles, plastic bags, forks, spoons, combs, lighters, razors, flip-flops, and rope. This is becoming a common sight on our beaches here in Okinawa. I photographed the crabs in their natural habitat, and also on a white portable studio board for the Meet Your Neighbors project, which is dedicated to connecting people worldwide with the wildlife in their community. And this technique stood out, since it focused on the animal and plastic with no other distractions. I photographed them up close to show the detail of the animal using a macro lens. Hermit crabs are like the caretakers of the shoreline. They keep our shorelines clean, feeding on the marine life that wash ashore. They also feed on a variety of fruit and help out with seed dispersal. They also help aerate and fertilize the soil of the coastal forest. Favorite foods: screw pines, coconuts, plant bark, beach, flowers, and waxy substances that wash ashore. In Okinawa, the hermit crabs have few natural predators: birds, ants, other crabs, and of course humans. Biggest threat: habitat loss and over-collecting from the pet trade. Hermit crabs in Okinawa are listed as protected species, but people continue to take them. Hermit crabs use a variety of seashells to protect their sensitive abdomen. If no shell is available, they will use a seed and even our waste. Some of the most interesting man-made items that I have found the hermit crabs adapting with: light bulb ends, glass bottles, food scoops, and laundry detergent caps. Why do these crabs adapt with their plastic in the first place? Is there a limited number of shells on our beaches due to over-collecting? Yes, that's possible. What we do know, they molt, they grow, they get bigger, and eventually need to replace their current mobile home. Crabs fight over the shells constantly, in search of a perfect real estate. With enough persistence and bullying, eventually the weak will abandon their home in hope of finding another shell quickly. If they cannot find a shell, they will adapt with plastic. They do not prefer plastic homes, they are just making do until they find a better option. Something I learned recently is that hermit crabs have the ability to modify shells over time. The ability to hollow out the inner lip to make it roomier. This is an example of a modified shell passed down from generations. In 2020, Tony Choi recommended that I place empty shells on our beaches. He explained that Taiwan had the same issue with shell overcollecting. Tony was kind enough to send me the first shell donation, and after that more people started making contributions. So I engraved the name Miller and a number on the shell, document the date and the location in my logbook. Hopefully labeling the shells will prevent beachcombers and fishermen from taking them. Every hermit crab adapting with her waste receives a proper shell home. First, I photograph the hermit crab in its natural habitat. Then the hermit crab is placed into a beach bucket with a variety of shells and makes the switch on its own. The process takes anywhere from 5 minutes to 24 hours depending on the shell preference. Last, I take a before and after photograph with a black background. Then I release the hermit crab back into the wild. They get a better home, and I keep the trash. Here is my mobile home display. As you can see, I am starting to get a nice collection going. So how many times have you picked up an empty shell and brought it home? I'm definitely guilty. Most people don't realize that they are taking a potential home of a hermit crab. If you are a shell collector, please return all unwanted shells back to the coastline. That's the best thing you can do. And last, I would like to share with you one of my favorite photographs taken on Okinawa, Japan. Arigatou gozaimasu.
Suhan Kim comes to CrabCon by way of South Korea. He manages the Korean online hermit crab community and collects a wide variety of new shells from around the world to be used for new hermit crab homes. He also works hard to improve conditions for sick hermit crabs that have been imported into Korea, doing his best to rehabilitate them and get them healthy enough to find their new forever homes. Please welcome Suhan Kim.
네, 안녕하세요. 저는 수환입니다. 여러분들과 크래콘을 함께 할 수 있어서 영광이고요. 저는 한국 사람입니다. 용인에 살아요. 걱정 마세요. 북한 사람 아닙니다. 저는 코치입니다. 체중 감량이랑 체중 증가를 가르치고 있고요. 주로 남성들을 많이 가르칩니다. 오늘은 동북아시아의 가장 자랑거리인 껍질을 말씀을 좀 드릴게요. 가장 흔한 이름은 코르누투스이고요. 지금 현재 학명은 사자해라고 되어 있어요. 근데 저는 이 이름을 쓰지 않아요. 왜냐면 일본에서 독단적으로 만든 이름이라서. 한국에서는 소라라고 하고 일본에서는 사자해라고 합니다. 전 이 비디오에서 소라라고 언급을 할게요. 영어로는 뿔난 터반이라고 합니다. 서식지를 좀 보여드릴게요. 제주도 소라가 제일 많이 살고 있어요. 통영, 거제, 부산, 울산, 남해, 여수, 완도, 포항, 그리고 영덕. 소라가 원래 남쪽에만 서식을 했는데 지금은 수온 때문에 동쪽까지 이동해서 서식을 한다고 하네요. 마냥 좋은 것만이라고 할 수는 없습니다. 지구온난화라는 소리니까. 이번에 비행기 타고 4월에 제주도에 갔다 왔어요. 크랩콘 동영상 찍으려고. 제가 여행한 거 요약한 비디오 보고 지나가실게요.
Now waiting for income. Please make sure that your seatbelt is securely fastened.
이 껍질은 인도네시아 펠릭스가 가장 먼저 국제적으로 유통을 했어요. 어떻게 이거를 취급하게 됐냐고 물어봤는데 별거 없었습니다. 펠릭스가 일본에 여행을 갔는데 맛이 궁금했대요. 그래서 그거를 껍데기를 집으로 가지고 와서 인도네시아에서 처음으로 소라기들한테 사용을 했다고 합니다. 펠릭스가 이 껍질에 대해서 얼마나 자부심을 가지고 있는지 알 수가 있었습니다. 소라 누가 잡는지 궁금하지 않으세요? 이거는 해녀가 잡는 건데, 해녀가 뭐냐면 바다의 여성 잠수부예요. 바다에 깊이 잠수를 해가지고 뭐 전복이나 소라, 해조류를 끌어올려서 생계로 삼습니다. 해녀들은 한국의 살아있는 문화재라고 해요. 인간 문화재라고 생각하시면 됩니다. 근데 해녀들한테 지금 문제가 있어요. 지금 고령화가 심해져가지고 그거를 이어나갈 젊은 해녀들이 지금 없는 거예요. 그게 문제예요, 지금. 이 직업이 힘들고 후유증이 심해가지고 젊은 여성들이 기피하는 직업이에요. 엄청 적은 20대 젊은 여성들이 택하기도 하는데 결국에 한계에 부딪혀서 포기를 합니다. 지금 현재 가장 젊은 해녀들은 대부분 30대 여자들인데 그것도 많지가 않아요. 엄청 적습니다. 제가 운 좋게 2세대 해녀분들을 만나서 얘기를 좀 해봤어요. 물어볼 것도 있어서 한번 여쭤볼게. 해녀를 언제부터 시작하신 거예요?
아이고 해내한 지는 우리 학교 다닐 때 어릴 때부터 양식장 해경하면
네.
그냥 양식장 해경한 다음은 무조건 물에 물질했어요. 옛날 어릴 때부터 헤엄칠 줄 아니까
네네.
그때부터 물질을 했죠.
엄청 오래되신 거네요, 그러면?
그러니까 이제 나 예순에 한 50년 50년 됐
50년이요? 그럼 여기 어머니께서는?
난
네.
우리 13살부터 초등학교 다닐 때부터
네네.
초등학교 다니다 와 옛날에는 고모도 없고 요만한 수경 요만한 거 쓰고
족쇄는
그럼 완전히 그냥 이러고 들어가시네요.
코도 다 이제 내물고 요만한 수경 쓰고 이제 머리에도 이렇게 수가
네.
이렇게 동여 매고 이제 물속삼도 아니고 속고 쓰는 거 옛날에 있어.
네.
속고 패대 가는 거지 이제 우알로요. 이만한 거. 그거 있고. 선생님은
네.
공부하려는 공부는 안 하고 왜 이렇게 와서 이 에너지를 배우냐고 막 발질로 부적을 막 차면에 막 던져버려 막 그냥 하지 말라고.
네.
그래도 옛날에 엄마네 없으니까 그거 하려고 또 엄마네 보탬도 되고 또 이것도 이거 배양 놔둬야
네.
사후에 희망성도 있고 해가지고 이제 그때부터 배운 것이 이제 이제까지 했지. 나가 70인데
네. 74시요. 그러면은 61년 하신 거예요?
그거 했지.
예상보다 훨씬 오래 하셨네요.
그러다 보니까 이제 관절 오고 허리 디스크
귀도 안 좋으시네요.
귀도 안 좋고
눈도 어둡고 옛날에는 여기 소라도 팔로가 없었기 때문에 저 있지 강원도로 전라도로 그 돈벌레 해내선에서 돈 벌라고 여기 이제 소라도 옛날에 이제 그 전에는 수출도 많이 하고 했지만 옛날에 팔로가 없어서 해다가 막 삶아 먹고 삶아 먹을 줄밖에 몰랐어. 젓갈도 못 담아서 먹을 줄도 모르고 후라이팬에 볶아서 먹을 줄 오로지 삶아서 먹는 것밖에 몰랐어.
음식을 할 줄 모르니까
음식을 할 줄 몰랐지 옛날 할머니들은.
그때는 쓴 미역,
미역만
미역,
집했지.
전초
전초
그런 거만 했지.
그런 것.
그러면 원로시네요.
원로.
네.
우리 할머니네가 원로인데 어머니네가 원로인데 그다음
그 다음 세대.
다음 세대가 우리 비자니.
지금 네.
그때는
소라가 막 자갈밭에 가면 소라나 자갈이나 똑같았어. 막
그렇게
진짜
많았어요.
많았지. 막 발로 밟으면은 막 소라도 막 밟아지고 막.
우리 어릴 때 초등학교 다닐 때 물이 막 내리잖아 하늘처럼
네.
막 내리면 바구니 하나 들고 요 등대 있는데
네네.
그쪽만 가도 한 바구니에서 들어왔어.
그 정도였어요.
그죠?
캄캄한 밤에.
팔로가
캄캄한
없으니까
밤에 가서 아무데라도 구멍 있으면 이렇게 찌르면 맨 소라야.
걔가 밤에 활동을 해서 그런 거죠?
소라는 밤에 활동을 안 해.
밤에 활동을 많이 해.
그러면 낮에 잡으러 들어가실 때는 그러면 어떻게 잡으시는 거예요?
그냥 막 밖에 나와 있어.
아, 나와 있어요? 움직이진 않고 그냥.
아 움직이는 것도 있어.
움직여 소라도.
움직여요?
막 움직여.
옛날보다 지금이 소라가 더 없잖아요.
친해져.
잘 안 잡히잖아요.
옛날 안 잡히지 옛날보다는.
네, 그러면은
해녀들 요즘은 이 비양도발에 가면
네.
보통 상군이라고 상군, 중군, 하군이 있는데
네.
상군들은 보통 못해 7, 80kg.
네.
그거를 하루에 날씨 좋으면 한 달이면 한 20일 정도 해. 날씨
20일 이요?
좋으면 20일. 그전에는 무역 완전 일본 많이 팔았지. 언니네 무역할 때는 한 40년 전 일본에 40년 전에는 일본 수출했어. 원딱 무역선이 소라만 운반하는 배가 있었어. 그래서
배가 있어.
배가 있어요?
무역사.
무역사.
직접 제주도 거 실려가지고 무역사 일본으로 가는 배가.
일본으로 가는 거.
안 나. 근데 그 전에는 막 일본에서
네.
여기 잔소라를 받아갔대느더라.
조그만 거요?
조그만 거 받아가가지고 거기서 양식을 하는 거야.
아.
양식을 해서 자기네만 이제 수입을 안 하고 자기네 나라에서 그거를
양식을
양식해가지고
해서
팔로 해가지고 그때는 수출이 좀 줄어들었어요. 그래서
지금도 그렇게 막 수출을 많이 해가지는 않죠.
아니야 코로나 때문에 일절 안 하니까 소라가 팔로가 없었어.
근데 그게 제가 알기로는 소라가 자라는 게 엄청 느리다고 들었는데
근데 우리 알기로는 막 빠를 것 같아.
항상 가면 있으니까.
아니 요만한 거 이따가 어느 날 가보면 이런 거는 없고 굵어져.
이만한 거만 그게
우리가 바다에 군체기가 6월 1일부터 8월 31일까지 군체기야.
그
산란기라
못
해가지고
잡는 거. 예.
못 잡는 기간인데 그 기간 지나서 물에 가면 소라가 막 많아.
참 이상하네요.
그는 이 크는 게 다른 것 같아 우리는 보면. 아니 우리 종나무리가 요만한 거 있다가 나중에 가보면 요만한 게 있다니까.
그 정도예요?
빨리 크는 것 같아.
빨리 커.
빨리 커요? 하긴 뭐 키워보지 않는 이상.
우리가 이 갯바위에
네.
여름에 가보면 요만큼씩 날싸있거든.
네.
크기가 요만큼 돼 있어. 어느 날 가보면 요만하고 어느 날 가보면 요만큼.
한 2개월만큼은 많이 커.
이번에는 소라의 다양한 모양에 대해서 좀 설명을 해드릴게요. 자, 첫 번째, 제일 흔한 소라입니다. 거의 80%가 이런 모양이라고 생각하시면 돼요. 보통 뿔이 두 줄로 형성이 되어 있는데 가장 흔하지만 우리가 가장 좋아하는 모양이죠. 근데 뿔이 부러진 게 많아서 멀쩡한 게 잘 없어요. 자, 두 번째는 뿔이 한 줄만 있는 소라. 이거는 그렇게 흔하진 않아요. 그리고 뿔이 안쪽으로 형성이 되어 있고 뒤쪽에는 없어요. 이거는 소라게들이 꽤나 좋아할 것 같네요. 이것도 뿔이 한 줄만 나 있네. 이거는 모양이 조금 달라요. 뿔이 이렇게 뒤쪽에 형성이 되어 있고 앞에는 없어요. 옆에 거랑 비교를 해보면 뿔의 위치가 조금 다르다는 걸 볼 수가 있어요. 자, 마지막으로 뿔이 없는 소라. 일반적인 터보랑 모양이 똑같다고 보시면 되고 극강의 가벼움을 자랑합니다. 아마 소라게들이 가장 좋아하는 모양이 아닌가 싶어요. 이거는 아마 펠릭스한테 받은 사람이 몇 분 계실 것 같아요. 이번에 청소 도구를 설명을 해드릴게요. 껍질 청소할 때 쓰는 거. 첫 번째 드레멜. 아마 미국 사람들은 이거 구하기 쉬울 거예요. 저렴하고 실용적이고 이거 가지고 있으면은 껍질 작업이 엄청 쉬워집니다. 자, 두 번째는 니퍼. 이거는 산호나 따개비 붙어 있는 거 없앨 때 사용을 합니다. 세 번째, 핸드 스틸 브러쉬. 이거는 셀수록 좋아요. 꼭 필요한 거는 아닌데 이거 있으면 좀 디테일하게 이물질 제거가 가능해요. 네 번째, 사포 또는 드레멜 사포. 이거는 이제 껍질 가장자리 다듬을 때 사용을 하는데 꼭 있어야 하는 건 아니고. 다섯 번째, 드레멜 스틸 브러쉬. 이거 제일 중요해요. 이거 없으면 껍질 청소 힘들고 이게 표면의 이물질을 가장 빠르게 제거를 해줍니다. 꼭 있어야 돼요, 이거. 첫 번째, 드레멜 스틸 브러쉬. 이거를 사용해서 껍데기 표면을 청소를 할 거예요. 이거 되게 편해요. 사용하면 청소도 빨리 할 수 있고 가격도 저렴하고 엄청 좋습니다. 꽤 보기 좋아졌네요. 그 다음은 핸드 스틸 브러쉬 이용해서 겉에 먼지를 조금 더 섬세하게 털어볼게요. 만약에 시간 없으시면 이거 그냥 건너 뛰셔도 돼요. 이번에는 드레멜 사포 써볼게요. 껍질 가장자리 다듬는 건데 사실 이거는 저는 크게 중요하게 생각은 안 해요. 근데 많이 부러져 있으면 작업을 해야겠죠. 이거 먼지 많이 날리니까 조심해야 돼요. 안 그러면은 폐가 안 좋아질 수도 있기 때문에 조심하세요. 뭐 그렇게 엄청 큰 차이는 아닌데 나쁘지 않네요. 어차피 우리 소라게들이 다 부셔버리니까. 이제 끓일게요. 물 끓기 시작하면 한 30초에서 40초 뒤에 불 끕니다. 그리고 미네랄 오일 준비하세요. 껍질이 마르면. 이거 미국 FDA에서 인증이 된 거기 때문에 사용하셔도 되는데 꼭 필요하진 않아요. 제외하셔도 됩니다. 껍질에 오일 발랐으면 수건으로 닦아주세요. 작업 끝났습니다. 쉽죠? 드레멜 있으면 어렵지 않아요. 이 껍질의 장점은 가벼운 거예요. 다른 터보 껍데기보다. 한국에서 이 껍데기를 많이 사용을 하는데 국제적으로 이 껍데기에 대해서 공유를 할 엄두는 못 냈어요. 사실은 소라가 극단적이에요, 선호도가. 가벼운 데에 비해서 테피스트리보다 인기가 없어요. 브레비마너스는 그래도 꽤 좋아하는 것 같아요. 제 생각보다 선호도가 높지는 않았습니다. 소라에 대해서 마이크랑 정보 교환을 되게 많이 하고 있거든요. 저한테 이 소라에 대해서 많은 의견을 줘요. 네, 감사하죠. 땡큐 마이크. 이 껍질을 제가 최대한 나눌 수 있을 때까지 나눌 거예요. 그래야 우리가 같이 공부를 할 수가 있으니까. 왜냐하면 우리는 다 펑키보이를 원하잖아. 그죠? 여러분들한테 소라 만드는 과정을 보여드릴 수 있어서 굉장히 영광이었고요. 긴 동영상 봐주셔서 감사드립니다. 만약에 내년에 또 기회가 있다면 그때 또 크래콘에 참가할게요. 땡큐.
Sarah Porter has been rescuing hermit crabs and giving them a little slice of the beach life in New York City since 2014 when she saw a post on Craigslist. She drove out to New Jersey to pick up a tank that had 5 to 7 crabs from a young woman who was going off to college. Since then, Sarah has taken in many more hermit crabs in need of a home, has upgraded her tank, started her own rescue organization, Two Claws Up, and has been featured in USA Today, AMNY, Pix 11 News, and Upworthy for her rescue operation. She also co-produced a short documentary about horseshoe crabs in the Northeast, along with how they are vital to COVID-19 vaccine development. When not rescuing hermit crabs or exploring the flora and fauna of New York City, she works for a nonprofit organization focused on poverty alleviation and is also on the board of the New York City Peace Corps Association. Please welcome Sarah Porter.
Hi, I'm Sarah Porter, and I rescue hermit crabs in New York City who need a home. I've probably rescued about 30 over the last 5 years. We have the whole spectrum of sizes. The smallest ones are probably about the size of a nickel to a quarter in the seashell that they wear. And then the biggest one is probably the size of a small baseball. Never planned on being a hermit crab rescuer. Like any New Yorker, I found myself on Craigslist one day and I was looking through the ads and I came across a young woman who posted an ad that she was going away to college and she had a tank of hermit crabs that she was looking for someone to take in. So my partner and I talked about it and said, actually, you know what, they sound like a fun pet. Why don't we go out there and pick them up? After we got them, I was doing some research and I just came across how much that hermit crabs need to be healthy and happy. When we set up the tank, we first made sure that we had really deep sand for them to go down and molt. We also have saltwater and freshwater because they need both to drink. They also need really high humidity in the air. They have a specific UV light to mimic sunlight, and lots of fresh food. They basically eat what I'm eating. So vegetables, fruit, protein, nuts. They love popcorn. Because hermit crabs are always looking for a bigger shell to move into as they grow, we actually have a shell shop in the tank where there's just tons of seashells in different sizes that the hermit crabs can select. Fortunately, most hermit crabs that are sold tend to be marketed more as toys or as souvenirs. Hermit crabs need such specific things to survive, and the Jersey Shore and the pet stores usually don't give people the right information. So I started Two Claws Up on YouTube and Instagram to be a resource for people who might already have hermit crabs or are thinking about getting them, to really see how to set up your tank correctly and how to make sure that hermit crabs have what they need. I've heard from almost every person who's contacted me or made an ad on Craigslist saying, I have these hermit crabs, I have no idea what to do with them. Can someone please take them from me? And then they find me. I never thought I would be spending my free time rescuing hermit crabs. I'm actually a very normal person that has a full-time job, but I just kept seeing that there were so many people in New York City that had hermit crabs and didn't know what to do with them, and were looking for someone to help them out. I don't know how many people can fill that role, so it wasn't really a calling, but I knew this is something that I could do for people, and I have the setup, and I have a great tank, and I'm really happy to give these hermit crabs a little slice of the beach life here in New York City.
As you saw in the news story, I've been adopting hermit crabs who need a home since 2014. I never imagined becoming a hermit crab rescuer. It was not on my list of things to do. Like many New Yorkers, I look at the free Craigslist ads when I'm bored. I don't remember what I was looking for that day. It might have been a soda stream or a mini trampoline, but what I found was a young woman who was moving away to college and wanted to find a home for her hermit crabs. And I remember thinking, they could be interesting pets, small enough to fit in my New York City sized apartment. They also seemed like low maintenance animals, perfect for living in the city. I begged my partner Matt to drive us out to New Jersey and took home the small tank, which I was told contained 5 to 7 hermit crabs. At the time, this made no sense to me. How could you not know how many crabs you currently had? But at the time, I knew nothing about the magic of molting. I did everything wrong in the beginning. I still thought of hermit crabs as cute little creatures that were easy to take care of and didn't need more than some sand, hermit crab pellets, and a water-soaked sponge. I'm embarrassed to admit this, but I even built a hermit crab maze out of old boxes and let them run around in it in my living room. I had joined a Facebook group for hermit crab owners and quickly got schooled when I posted a photo of my crabby games. I took it down immediately and started to read about what owning hermit crabs actually entailed. I was shocked to learn how much these little guys need to be healthy. We needed to go shopping. The crabs came in a small tank, probably around 15 gallons or so, with a mesh lid, and I quickly learned that they need high humidity to survive. I improved the tank they came in. They now had high humidity, real food, and a dish for salt water and fresh water. One night, while walking home from the bar, Matt and I saw a huge empty aquarium, along with a ton of other stuff on the sidewalk being given away. My guess was someone was either moving or going through a breakup. So I got to work. We went to Home Depot to get supplies, including 200 pounds of sand, not kidding. I was finally able to create a little slice of the beach life for my hermit crabs. Immediately, they became more active and healthier looking. Pretty soon, I started noticing other ads on Craigslist with similar stories. Help, I just bought some hermit crabs and had no idea how much care they need. Will someone please adopt them? I've gotten crabs from all over New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut, and I've collected some pretty interesting stories along the way. One guy posted that his company Christmas party was racing hermit crabs as a game and then just giving them away to attendees at the end of the night, whether they wanted them or not. Another woman said that while on vacation at the Jersey Shore, she found 2 crabs abandoned in her hotel room. Someone had most likely experienced a case of buyer's remorse after purchasing them from the boardwalk and then just left them behind in their small wire cage. Perhaps the most bizarre story was a couple who went abroad and brought home a seashell from the beach, only to find a hermit crab in it 4 days later in their suitcase. Side note, I've stopped collecting seashells from the beach. Seashells are homes for hermit crabs, and shell collectors may end up with a stowaway. I've actually had more than one person email me that this has happened to them. Realizing my tank and apartment were not big enough to take them all in, I decided a better solution would be providing education and resources to help aspiring crabbers know what they were getting into. I started Two Claws Up on both YouTube and Instagram as a place to share videos, tips, and cute pics to ensure that hermit crabs have everything they need to live long, happy, healthy, and crabby lives. I now get tons of emails from people with questions. Anything from, what kind of water do hermit crabs drink? Or, is it normal for them to sleep all day? And, can they eat popcorn? Yes, and they love it. I get a lot of messages from people who feel guilty for not providing the right care. I try hard not to shame anyone for not knowing what to do. It's no one's fault. Pet stores on the boardwalk rarely give the correct info on care or show a proper sample setup, and people are made to believe that hermit crabs are easy little pets, and they're also marketed more as souvenirs. No living creature is a toy or a throwaway souvenir, and places that sell any animal need to give the right information on how to care for them. I'm so glad this conference and this group exist, and that there are so many people out there who care and want to be an advocate or crabvocate. So if you want to see more crabby pics, crabby videos, check out Two Claws Up on YouTube or Instagram. I've got lots of them. And remember, always be crabby. Alright, we're about to go get another crab. So I just got an email from a family who went on vacation, came back with 2 crabs. One unfortunately didn't make it, so they're looking for a home for the other one. They realize that crabs are very social creatures. They need buddies. They found me. So after yoga, I've got my mat. We're gonna meet and hopefully give this guy a better life. Okay, here I am in front of the Starbucks in Queens, about to do another crab rescue.
We purchased 2 crabs while we were on vacation in Jersey Shore, and we brought them home. One of the crabs survived, one didn't, and he's been very lonely for a long time, and we want to make sure he has a better quality of life.
Okay, another successful crab rescue. Let's get him into the tank with all the buddies. Okay, we made it back home. As you can see, this is what he came in originally, a very small wire cage, offers no humidity, just is not what crabs should be kept in or sold in. Also, it's January here in New York, so he probably got a little chilly on the way back to the apartment, so we're gonna very quickly go get him in the tank. Okay, here goes. Johnny and Jessica, if you're watching, I hope you don't mind. I renamed the crab Tipsy. Always wanted to have a crab named Tipsy. But without much further ado, let's get him in the tank.
he's in the crabitat. We've got high humidity so he can breathe. We got a nice warm 80 degrees, just like the beach, saltwater pool, freshwater pool, deep sand for molting, lots of fruit, vegetables, and protein. Just threw some shrimp tails in last night, so he should have a pretty good day. Here he comes. I can see those cute little eyes, his little feelers. He's getting ready to explore. I'm sure he feels much more comfortable with the high humidity. Oh, yep, here he goes. He's out of his shell. Oh, just did an eye wipe. Hey Tipsy, how's it going? I think Squirt senses that there's a new member in the crabitat. As soon as I put Tipsy in, Squirt's perked up and his little feelers started moving around. Tipsy seems to be in tip-top shape, so keep watching. I will make sure to post an update, but I think he's gonna do great in his new home. Yay!
Amber Miner is a native Los Angelino, now living in beautiful British Columbia, Canada. A lifelong plant and animal lover with a passion for food and art, she has joined her skills together in her love and care of land hermit crabs. Keeping 9 species of Cenobita and roughly 35 individuals at any given time, most of her pursuits revolve around them. Rescue, adoption, education, activism, gardening, small batch homemade foods, ceramics, and even her crochet work are nearly all Cenobita related. Please welcome Amber Miner.
Gardening for Hermits, Tips for Growing and Storing Edible Flowers. Hello, crabby friends! Welcome to my hermit crab garden. Why grow flowers? By all means, grow whatever you'd like for them. Do not feel you have to limit yourself to flowers. I grow things that I cannot get locally or get fresh. For example, I am also growing a few black carrots. Fresh, pesticide-free, crabby-safe flowers are just so difficult to find, if not impossible, and expensive. We can't exactly use a scrub brush, peel them, or boil them to make them safer. Firstly, the most important reason is simply because they enjoy them. Doesn't help that it's one of the cutest things ever. Flowers are really healthy for them to eat and may even contribute to their beautiful coloration. A few things flowers provide: antioxidants, anthocyanins, flavonoids, minerals, omega fats, phytonutrients, polyphenols, and vitamins. Flowers are a natural food source they would find in the wild. Of course, the varieties we grow will most likely differ, unless you are lucky enough to live somewhere tropical. Offering flowers is more than just a snack. It can stimulate foraging behavior, which can provide hours of enrichment. Strategically place the flowers around the tank so they will have to do a little work before getting the reward. Remember to change up the locations often. Do I grow organic? Do not be thrown or tricked by labels. In the spirit of the word, one would think organic means safe, harmless, and pesticide-free. It does not. Organic does not mean safe. Organic allows for many pesticides to be used. Many of these organic insecticides, herbicides, and fungicides can be especially dangerous to our beloved pets. We need to grow or buy pesticide-free. This can be challenging. So then, where to start? I strongly recommend starting from seeds. This way we know what goes into growing them and that they are totally safe. Bonus, you get way more bang for your buck with seeds. For the price of buying one seedling, you can buy an entire package of seeds, which can start many, if not hundreds of plants. Then from those plants, you can save your seeds for next year. There are many ways to acquire seeds. Buy from online shops, buy from garden centers, the grocery store, even the dollar store. Collect seeds from your own plants at the end of the season. Join a seed swap group. There are many great online groups, especially on Facebook. You will find that many gardeners are happy to share and are quite generous. Join a seed bank. You can check out the seeds you want and send some back at the end of the season for the next person to use. You can also grow from cuttings. Ask friends, family, neighbors, even your local garden club for cuttings from the garden. Always ask. Make sure to triple check that they are pesticide free. Seedlings. 100% totally fine to start with seedlings, so long as they are safe. If you are buying from a nursery or garden center, steer clear of the giant garden centers, big name stores. Small local mom and pop shops will be your best bet. Contact them before going and ask questions. If you cannot get a definitive answer on what their plants are treated with, then do not take the chance. Look for a similar label, grown pesticide free. If you end up buying from someone local, Facebook Market, road stand, garden club, neighbor, etc., remember to ask if they have been treated with anything at all, not just if they are organic. Where? In ground or pots? Where do I plant them? That's totally up to you, so long as the container is big enough for your plant, if not in the ground, or your soil is safe and pesticide-free in ground. In the ground is great, free, and may require less upkeep, like watering and fertilizing less often. Raised garden bed. Grow bags. Pots of all kinds. Big hanging baskets. Little hanging baskets. Just make sure it's big enough for your plant of choice. You can even recycle vessels and save them from the landfill. This was briefly my fire pit. I used a combination of all of them to maximize my growing area. What can I grow? Depending on your space and gardening experience, you can choose to grow just a couple of easier varieties, like Calendula and Nasturtium, or you can go all out and grow hundreds of varieties. It's all up to you, but start small until you get the knack for it. Don't limit yourself to just traditional flowers. Vegetables like squash and peas, fruits like melon and strawberry, herbs like basil and sage, grains like buckwheat and amaranth, even the weeds like clover and dandelion. There are hundreds, if not thousands, of varieties that are safe. You can pick from the list of trusted Facebook groups or websites, or do your own research for things that are unsure of. The possibilities are nearly endless. Feed me. Safe fertilizers. Here is a selection of various plant foods that may be used. Some of these you may already feed your hermits, so you know they are safe. This is by no means a complete list. The most important is a good, basic, all-purpose fertilizer. This is what I use. It's a balanced mix of feather meal, alfalfa meal, blood meal, glacial rock dust, natural rock phosphate, fishbone meal, mineralized phosphates, potassium sulfate, insect frass, basalt rock dust, humic acid, gypsum, kelp meal, oyster shell flour, and green sand. You can mix this into your soil before planting, or you can add it to the top of the soil later if you think your plants need it. Next we have kelp. I like using liquid kelp extract. You can also buy the powdered or granulated kind. Those you will need to mix into your soil. Alternately, you can use fresh kelp, but then it needs to rot in place. It is time consuming and can be stinky. Best if you do it over winter while you aren't growing anything. This is straight from the bottle. You will need to dilute it. Once you have it diluted, per the instructions, there are 2 ways to use it. The most obvious way to use it is just to water with it. The next is called foliar spray. We are going to feed the leaves directly. Leaves only, no flowers please. Next we have our Big Brand conventional fertilizer. You can buy it in several different forms, but these bright blue crystals are the ones you are probably most familiar with. Now there's a bit of debate as to how good they are for our use, so I'll neither recommend it or tell you not to use it. We all use what we can and make the best choices we are able to. Worm castings, worm poop, black gold for the garden. You can mix this in your soil at any time or sprinkle it on top. It is an all-purpose, slow-release fertilizer that also improves your soil structure. Green sand, glauconite, mined from the ocean floor, it is full of beneficial trace minerals in a form that is easy for the plants to uptake and will not burn them. It is also a soil conditioner, so will improve your soil structure, especially true if you have clay soil. Crab and lobster shell exoskeleton, another great all-purpose fertilizer that you may already have on hand, full of micro and macronutrients as well as calcium and chitin. Chitin helps promote beneficial fungal growth as well as supporting beneficial insects that keep pests away. Add some under each plant or on top of the soil. Clam and oyster shell. These will add calcium over time. Most importantly though, they may help deter pests such as moles, voles, slugs, and snails. Put them around the mole-vole tunnels or surround your plants with them to keep slugs and snails away. Eggshells. Their use is identical to the oyster shell. Use them to deter garden pests while adding a little calcium. Pest management without pesticides. One of the best ways to keep pests at bay is to keep your plants happy and healthy. This allows them to naturally fend off disease and quickly recover from an insect infestation or damage. The 4 most important things to consider are healthy soil, adequate water, not too much or too little, adequate sun, not too much or too little, the right season temperature. Also look for disease-resistant plants. Some varieties are better than others. No insecticides, no herbicides, no fungicides, not even organic. Slugs and snails. This poor little gourd is being eaten by slugs. Add your eggshells to the soil around the plants you want to protect. Make sure to keep some of the pieces big and jagged. This makes it uncomfortable for the snails and slugs to climb over. Most other critters. Cinnamon and chili pepper powder sprinkled around your plants are a natural way to ward off a variety of insects that would have to climb over it to reach the plant. As a bonus, the cinnamon is said to also help keep some disease at bay, especially protecting young seedlings. Spray 'em. Go ahead and use a strong jet of water to knock those bugs off. This is especially useful for aphids. Old-fashioned. Pick, squish, pick, squish. Pick, squish, pick, squish, pick, squish, pick, squish, pick, squish. Beer trap. Beer in a shallow dish buried below ground will attract and kill slugs and snails. Leave it out overnight. A potato trap can be used to attract and capture isopods, weevils, etc. Many of you will already be familiar with this method to capture isopods to use as a cleanup crew. Detailed instructions are easily found online. Garden helpers. Making your garden space welcoming to helpers can really reduce your workload. Spiders are especially important. Please, for the love of plants, do not kill spiders. You can also welcome or sometimes even purchase praying mantis or ladybugs. Ladybugs are especially good aphid hunters. Birds. Birds can also be wonderful garden helpers. They will eat most bugs, but especially grubs, caterpillars, and other juicy things that would love to have a go at your plants. Let's talk watering. This is a no. Do not spray your plants. I said no, except in rare circumstances like foliar feeding or washing away bugs. The above ground plant does not need watering. It can cause or spread a disease. Yes, please. Water at the base of your plants with as little splashing as possible. It is typically also best to water in the morning, if you are able, so that any splashing that does occur can dry out in the sun throughout the day. Should I water? Overwatering can also lead to disease. Please check before watering. The soil may look dry, but it's not. Of course, different plants have different water requirements, but this soil is just about perfect for most. Weeds. Everyone has them, no one wants them. Just pull them. Or prevent them. Some cardboard and mulch do wonders. Or fill an empty space with something beneficial. I've added clover. Once it fills in, there won't be space for unwanted things to grow. Hey, not half bad. Remember, these are only a few pest prevention tips. There will always be plenty of different methods to try. If one doesn't work for you, try another. Grow plants, grow! Now that you have planted your seeds or seedlings, give them love and time to grow. Make sure they have the right amounts of sun, good soil, that has safe fertilizer added as need be, and enough water to keep them healthy, but not swimming. Enjoy watching them grow. Harvest day. The best time of day to harvest is the morning, before the heat of the day. They will be juicy and sweeter. Of course, the hermits aren't too picky though. You want sharp, clean scissors. We want to damage the plant as little as possible and do not introduce any disease. Think of it like having a little surgery. Look for blossoms that are just opening. We do not want them to have used energy to make seeds yet. They will also continue to open a little as they are preserved. Immature. Just right. Bit too mature. Just right. Immature. Just right. Immature. Past its prime. Just right. Past its prime. Just right. You will also want to make sure you don't bring bugs inside. I inspect before cutting, shake each flower, let the harvest rest outside so any creatures may escape or let themselves be known for relocation. You may also wish to rinse them. Mine were just washed in the rain. I know exactly what's in my yard, and my hermits love any nectar or pollen. Feed some now, store for later. Feed some fresh, it's the best. Longer stem varieties can be placed in a vase of water and put in the fridge for a few days as well. Preserve for later. Freezer. You can freeze them to preserve them, but honestly they will turn to mush. Maybe your hermits are into eating flower mush. It won't hurt them, but it's not really recommended. Preserve for later. Oven. Unless your oven has a built-in dehydrate function, it can be hit and miss. The high temperatures of the oven and lack of air circulation will typically result in cooked flowers. Again, okay, but not good. If you want to give it a go, put your oven at the very lowest setting and keep the door slightly cracked. Open it every so often to let the humidity out. For later, sun-dried. This method can work wonderfully, but generally only if you live in a warm, dry climate. Lay the flowers in a single layer on a flat, dry surface in direct sun. You can even buy or make an air dryer. For stemmed flowers, you can also hang them upside down as you would do with herbs. If they aren't dry when the sun goes down, bring them inside so they aren't hit with dew overnight, and bring them back out the next day. Preserve for later, dehydrator. In my opinion, the best method of preservation available to the average person. You want to dehydrate at the lowest setting. Remember, we are drying, not cooking. The lowest setting will lock in all the lovely beneficial things in the flowers. I know it's tempting to crank it up high so it goes faster, but you will end up with dead, brown, papery things, ruining months of work growing these. Size matters. Some flowers are large and bulky, are made up of many smaller flowers, or are very solid. This means it will be difficult for moisture to escape, resulting in uneven drying. For these, I like to cut smaller bunches away from the main stem, remove tough woody stems, cut the end tip off dense blossoms, cut them into even pieces. This will give you much better results and flowers that will last stored much longer. Do not overcrowd. They need airflow. Group like varieties together. This makes it much easier to tell when they are done and remove if necessary. The amount of time it takes can vary from a few hours to a couple of days. It depends on their size, moisture level, efficiency of your dehydrator, and the temperature and the humidity of the room it is in. Notice how much they shrink, the texture, dry but not crumbling, the color. If you choose the right flowers, their color will deepen, not brown or fade. You can see this one was a bit past its prime. That's okay. It's not bad for them, just not as good. I'll offer it sooner rather than later, and keep the better ones for storing. Store for later. Ideally, you want to store in an airtight glass container. Doesn't need to be fancy. I upcycle all kinds of jars and food containers. You can use plastic too, especially since it will be stored in dry, cool, and out of the light. Totally go ahead and reuse baggies. Light will deteriorate them faster, so store them in the dark. A dedicated cabinet is great. A box is fine. A bag is just as good. We don't need to be fancy. Reduce, reuse, and recycle. No matter what you use, put a date on it. Now, I know this jar was from last year, and I need to use it first. Thank you for taking time to watch my presentation. We sincerely hope you learned a little something and will be able to use this knowledge to start your own hermit crab garden, big or small. As a special thank you for making it this far, please pass me the secret code, Hermit Crab Garden, when you place an order at my booth during CrabCon 2021 for a special bonus homegrown Krabby treat, while supplies last. This video is property of Amber Weiner and may not be shared or distributed without permission outside of CrabCon 2021 or affiliated promotions.
Christine Sandberg became obsessed with hermit crabs in the summer of 2013. She spent that summer on the Jersey Shore and saw hundreds of hermit crabs huddled in wire cages. It had been many years since she'd even thought about hermit crabs. Then she remembered the lone hermit crab of her childhood that she purchased from similar conditions. Sadly, it didn't last long, but at that time she didn't know what she was doing. Fast forward to 2013, and Christine wondered what actually makes for good care for these interesting critters. So she researched and stumbled upon the HCA. She read everything she could and participated in the forums for 4 years before finally adopting her own 6 purple pinchers in the summer of 2017. Since then, she's been sharing her hermit crab journey on Instagram as @Christine's Crab Care. Last year's CrabCon was the final encouragement she needed to open up her own Etsy shop, selling hermit crab food and fun novelty items. She's currently elbow deep in a tank renovation and hopes to be able to take in more rescue hermit crabs very soon. Please welcome Christine Sandberg.
Hello, CrabCon attendees. I am so excited to be a speaker at Last Minute Edition and talk to you about advocating for hermit crabs through the use of social media. My name is Christine. You may know me on Instagram as Christine's Crab Care. Also, I'm on the HCA as C Fiesta. If you've hung out online with me, you've probably recognized my face, but if I haven't met you yet, I would love to. Feel free to say hi in the comments. I will be there. I would not miss CrabCon for the world. I put it on my calendar and yeah, anyway, I'm there in the comments. I can promise you that, even though this is pre-recorded. So why should we advocate for hermit crabs on social media? I think there's a natural tendency or pull to advocate for these cute little critters once we've learned about kind of the ordeal they have gone through and the struggles and the abuse that they've endured before coming into our homes. And once we've learned and known better, we want to teach others to do better as well. And so I think there's a natural tendency. However, sometimes this natural tendency comes off horribly. It's an explosion of all proportions, and it makes people turn away, become uninterested, don't want any hermit crabs. They give them up for adoption, or they just let them die, or they give them to someone who's equally unprepared for them. And so advocating correctly on social media can produce great results. I know I've talked with lots of people who have successfully had hermit crabs get through their first molt and get past that. And get past that kind of danger zone of the first 30 to 60 days that they're with them. And that's a huge accomplishment. And often it's because someone, not always me, but sometimes people like me and you have reached out to them and talked with them and gave them that bit of encouragement, pointed them in the right direction to where to find solid, reliable information. That made a world of difference. Just having someone to say, you're not alone, I experienced that as well, goes a long way into having someone become a hermit crab enthusiast. Most people don't want to abuse these animals. They want to do the best that they can. Those are the people we can help through advocating for hermit crabs on social media. And these are my tips and tricks to do so. And there's two main messages I want you to get out of this talk, and that is number one, anybody can be an advocate for hermit crabs online. You don't have to have a big following. You don't have to have a crab like themed Instagram page or YouTube or TikTok or Twitter or anything. Whatever you're using is fine. Anybody can be an advocate for hermit crabs online. So that's point number one. I will get to that more in detail. My second point is that honey attracts flies more than vinegar. All right, so those are my two takeaways I want you to get out of this conversation today. All right, number one, anybody can be a hermit crab advocate online. And I think you might be thinking, well, I don't have a crab-themed Instagram page, or I don't have a crab-themed Facebook group, or I don't know how to use TikTok, Christine. You're good. Anybody can be an advocate for hermit crabs. Yeah, even if you don't have a large following. You can do that by just showing everyone online your crabs and your crab setups. I think when people who are not familiar with the care of hermit crabs see an actual hermit crab setup, like the one here, and the one you have at home, when they see it for themselves and see a picture of it, they go, whoa, what's that? What kind of animal is that? That's cool. You can do that by showing a proper hermit crab setup, like the one I have here, or the one you have at home. It doesn't have to be the fanciest or the biggest or the coolest. That would be awesome if it is, but it doesn't have to be. Just showing a properly set up crab-habitat goes a long way in educating people about proper hermit crab care. Because I've talked to a lot of people, and most people I talk to have had a hermit crab at one point in their life, or their kids have had a hermit crab, or their grandkids have had a hermit crab. And it's usually, you know, the situation where it's, you know, the $5 crab from the beach or the boardwalk, and they bring it home in the wire plastic container, and it dies in a week to 6 months. A lot of people have had that experience, especially here in the States. For some reason, this is a universal experience for Americans to buy cheap hermit crabs and then wonder why they died, and that's all over. I live in Minnesota. We don't have a beach near us, and yet people have had this experience. People have gotten hermit crabs and had them die. So to see the contrast between what they think they know owning a hermit crab is like versus what it actually is a huge eye-opener for a lot of people. And it gets them thinking questions like, oh, why is there so much sand? Why is there a big water dish? Why is there a lot of fake plants or real plants? So those questions are great because you can answer those questions, hopefully. Point number two is that honey attracts flies more than vinegar. This is an old saying, and it means be nice. Be nice to people. Treat others how you want to be treated. I see a lot of well-meaning people want to call out others' poor setups or poor treatment of their hermit crabs, or what we perceive in that one photo or that one 30-second video. We're like, oh no, they must be abusing the hermit crabs, and then go to Keyboard Wars on their comment section and say, you're killing your hermit crabs. Your hermit crabs are gonna die. You're a murderer. Okay, I don't know if I've seen that, but I've seen these types of comments from well-meaning people. I don't think that gets us anywhere as a community of hermit crab owners and as well-meaning people. When someone comes to bat against you in an argumentative way, you're automatically shutting down. You're not receptive to new ideas. So instead, you can come to someone with a compliment, a smile, an online smile, if you will, a compliment, a suggestion, a offer of friendship, an offer of new information, that's going to come off a lot nicer than, oh my gosh, you're a horrible person, your hermit crabs are going to die because you don't know what you're doing, exclamation mark. Right? Also, along with this line, point number 3, remember that the people you're talking to online, these are regular folks. They are not hermit crab crazies like the rest of us. They are not spending their weekend attending a hermit crab conference. Even if they have hermit crabs, a lot of them won't. And that's fine, but they're regular people with regular busy lives and interests, and a lot of these times they're either parents of children or young children or young adults. And that's because hermit crabs are cheap pets to purchase at the pet store or on the boardwalk. So it attracts a lot of young people. I had a hermit crab when I was a kid. It didn't do so well. It died because I didn't know what I was doing. My point here is that these are regular people. You don't know how busy their lives are. You don't know what they're dealing with on a daily basis. You don't know if they're unemployed, lost a job, facing an illness or cancer, or having a hard time in their family. You don't know what they're going through. So I think it's just really important to keep that in mind, that when you're interacting with a faceless platform online, talking with other people, you don't know what kind of day they had. You don't know what's going on at home. So just be kind. Be nice. How do you be kind? How do you be nice? I'll give you my Christine Sandberg formula on being nice with people online. Number 1, we start with a compliment. I love your setup. Such a cute name you picked for your hermit crab. Aw, I'm so glad you got hermit crabs. We can think of something, people. Use your nice muscle. Stretch it. Start with a compliment, and then you can ask them a question or give them a piece of information in a nice way, such as, what kind of substrate are you using? Do you know why hermit crabs need salt water? Do you have a heat source for them? Ask a question in a nice way. Just one. Don't overwhelm them. Please, please don't write a novel when you're just getting to know someone. In the real world, I wouldn't walk up to you and say, oh, nice to meet you. Here's a book on everything I think you're doing wrong. And that's often how we come across online when we give them this information. Caveat here is if they ask for information, of course you have to answer with information, which rolls in nicely to point number 4. Know what you're talking about. Which I assume if you're here at CrabCon and you've watched all these videos, you have a decent idea of hermit crab care. And you know why we do things that we do. But can you explain it in a way that a regular person can understand? Do you understand it yourself? You don't have to be an expert. That's not what I'm saying. I also don't want you to claim to be a know-it-all. I don't know it all. I am learning. I am here at CrabCon learning from many experts and other enthusiasts, and I'm really excited. But can you articulate why we say to do things with hermit crabs a certain way? Let's take humidity. Why do we keep the tank humid? Can you articulate that? So when someone asks you a question, you can actually answer it. That's important. And it also is important to just be humble in what you don't know. I don't know everything. I tell people all the time, I don't know why your crab left its shell, but here's some options. It could be too hot. It could be sick. It could be dying. It could have gotten its shell taken away from it. These are just options. And I present options to people when they ask questions or if they're in a situation that they need help in. Leading into the next point is if you are a type of person who has trouble making compromises and seeing gray, if you see the world in black or white, right or wrong, then maybe what I'm talking about isn't for you. And I mean that in the nicest way. But there are many ways to keep a hermit crab alive. We've seen that with Carol Ormez, who's kept Jonathan Livingston crab alive for a very long time. She did things differently with him than many keepers do now with our crabs. And there are crab owners who are more quiet, who have kept their hermit crabs alive for 10, 20 years, who don't follow exactly the same way as another hermit crab owner who has kept their crabs alive for 10 years. So there are slight deviations in hermit crab care. And what I tell people is to focus on the common ground when you're faced with opposition, when you're educating people about hermit crab care. Try to stick to the basics. Replicating that tropical environment with heat and humidity is a great way to start. Having a substrate that they can dig in to molt, also very important. Providing them fresh food, also very important. And just know the most important things and share the most important things. And accept that some people do things differently, and that's okay. All right, number 6, have fun with your advocating. Show pictures of your happy, healthy hermit crabs and your fun setup. This is going to go a long way in telling people, getting them interested, letting them see what is the proper way to take care of hermit crabs. I promise you that if you took a picture or a graphic and made it something like, hermit crabs are dying by the millions in painted shells, and you posted that online, and then you took a picture of your hermit crabs and you put that online, I will almost guarantee you that the picture is going to get more likes, comments, engagement than the graphic that is just yelling at people for negative information. So I tell people, I'm telling you to go towards positivity. The negative information sometimes has to be shared, of course, but if you're going to do any kind of advocating, have fun with it. Make it positive. That's what's going to get people excited about hermit crabs. That's what's going to get people excited about adopting captive bred babies or having their own hermit crab setup. It's not going to be hearing the woes of the hermit crab industry. I don't know of anyone who learned, oh, that's so awful, let me go get some. Usually we get them because they're cute or they might be fun and interesting, and then we learn, oh, that's not so good over there. I can do better. I'm going to research and do better. Point number 7, when you are faced with opposition, people who disagree with you, people who say, you're crazy, this is just a $5 pet, I don't care if it doesn't have the perfect setup, it's going to die anyway. Those kind of comments, they're disheartening. But when you are faced with opposition, either people who are disagreeing with you on the points of the care that you're talking about, or they're just not receptive to the information that you're providing them, just point to resources. They can go and learn more at those resources if they want to, but you shouldn't spend your precious hours having a keyboard war with someone who's not receptive. So, point to resources such as Lycos, Crab Street Journal, Hermit Crab Association, the Hermit Crab Patch, different solid sources of information, and leave it at that. Say, here's more information if you would like to know more, and if you have any questions, you can reach out to me. I'll tell you guys what this is. I talked earlier about my formula. This isn't part of my formula. I offer a compliment. I give a small tip or a small question to get them thinking, and then I point them to a resource. And then I say, when you have questions about that resource, feel free to come back and ask me those questions. You don't have to say that, you can, but how I've kind of positioned myself on Instagram is a place where people can ask questions. Yeah, I tell people, here's the resource. Feel free to come back and ask me questions as you run into them, so that I'm not spending my time rewriting a whole care guide that's already been written, that's already solid information on the internet. I don't have time to do that every night. I would not sleep if I did that every night. Point number 8. This is sad, but it has to be said. You cannot save them all. There are millions of hermit crabs. They cannot all be saved by you. They cannot all be saved by talking to owners on the internet about what their hermit crabs are doing or how they're treating their hermit crabs. There's going to be people who are not receptive to your information. There's going to be people who don't care. Just flat out don't care. It's a $5 pet, the same as a goldfish. They just throw it away. When it dies, get another one, maybe. There's also going to be hermit crabs that die with unknown reasons. Maybe that is post-purchase syndrome. Maybe that is another source of stress. Maybe they were ill when they were picked up on the beach before they were brought in. We'll never know exactly until we can develop a test and mail it out to everyone and they can test their hermit crabs. We don't know all the reasons why hermit crabs die. You also can't change people's minds who want to be changed, who don't want to be changed. So here's my piece of advice for you. Focus on the people you can impact, not the people you can't. Spend your time and energy wisely. If it takes you 6 hours of going back to back with someone in a keyboard war and you're not getting anywhere, you didn't really gain anything because they're still in their position that they're against you or your ideas or hermit crab care. Can't change it. Didn't. It took you 6 hours and you went back and forth with them and you didn't get any sleep, but you didn't change it. You didn't change their opinion. Now take those 6 hours and put it towards maybe 10 people who are interested, who are receptive. You're going to get a lot more impact when you know when to back off. You're going to get a lot more impact by spending your time wisely, by focusing on good things and not the negative things. I am giving you permission right now. You can always step away from a conversation, especially online. It's super easy. You press the X button, or you close out your browser, or you turn off your phone. Done. I think we forget online that we can do that. And if somebody thinks you're rude, oh well, sorry. You sometimes have to protect yourself, protect your energy, protect your mental state and your mental thoughts. And if someone is really combative or saying really rude things to you or really ugly things to you, you don't have to engage with them. You don't have to convince them of the right way to do things. I'm giving you permission to just back away from the conversation. So I hope I gave you some good tips and ideas of how to go about advocating for hermit crabs on social media. And now I want to take a few minutes. I want to talk about specific platforms that you can use and kind of some tips and tricks that you can employ to use those platforms effectively. And this is a bit of an overlap with my day job. I'm a small business coach and I coach people to use social media and get their small business out there and in the world. So if you have any questions on that, let me know. All right, so here are some tips and tricks for each platform. Facebook. Oh, Facebook. Can't seem to live with it, can't seem to live without it. Am I right? Maybe that's just me. All right, so Facebook, you're going to get the most impact on your posts if you post in a group and or you post a video. You can post regular onto your timeline, your feed, your page, your personal page. You can do that and reach your family and friends that you're Facebook friends with. And that's great. Sometimes that's all you need to do. And this goes back to point number 1. Anybody can be a hermit crab advocate. And it starts with just your friends and family. Posting on Facebook is a great way to do it. Like, hey, we got hermit crabs and we thought we knew what we were doing, but we didn't. And this little wire cage isn't a great purchase. Instead, we set up a big tank, for example. All right. But if you're talking true advocacy and reach, Facebook group posts that you make in a Facebook group are going to reach more people, usually, unless you have like 10,000 Facebook friends, which I'm just confused and have more questions for you. But your Facebook group, those posts show up more in Facebook on the algorithm. So if you notice, if you scroll Facebook, the first 9 out of 10 of your posts are going to be from Facebook groups. And that's because Facebook values the impact of your Facebook group posts. Facebook values Facebook groups. If you see Facebook ads, they're always advertising Facebook groups because that's what they want people to use. So you use that and they put your posts higher up in other people's news feeds. And also videos or photos are going to show up more than just a text-based post. Speaking about Facebook groups, all the things I've said before can go along with this. Be kind to people, compliment people, know what you're talking about if you're going to say something. Be able to explain it. Like, why do we have humidity in a hermit crab tank? What does humidity do for our hermit crabs? Things like that. Don't just jump on the bandwagon of, oh, everyone else said this, so it must be true. Like, ask yourself, does that actually true? Do I know why this is true? And if you don't know, you can always ask a moderator or an admin, like, where are you getting this information? Why is this true? And they should be able to point you to some good resources, like why we think this, why we believe this, why we do it this way. And then, of course, just following the rules of the Facebook group that you're in is going to be beneficial and respectful of the groups, following the moderators and the admins and the rules that they've set. It's a good way to stay in that group. Follow the rules. Okay, that's Facebook. Well, let's go to Instagram. Instagram's owned by Facebook. In case you didn't know that, there you go. Instagram will show your posts to people when you do new things that Instagram's advertising. So on Instagram right now, Reels are the TikTok knockoff, in case you didn't know. And they are newer to Instagram, and Instagram wants everyone to use their new stuff. They want you to make Instagram Reels videos. If you have 300 followers and you post a photo, it's going to get seen at maximum by those 300 people. Usually, it's going to be more like a third of that number is going to see it, even have the opportunity to see it. So if you have 300 followers, 100 people are going to see that Instagram post. Now, if you post a reel, even if it is a terrible reel and you suck at it, this is my experience whenever I've tried to make them for other accounts, a bad reel is going to show up to way more people than even your very best Instagram photo will ever show up. And that is because Instagram Reels show up to new people who are not yet following you and people who are following you. So let's say you have 300 followers and you post an Instagram Reels. That Reels video could go to 1,500, 3,000, 30,000, 100,000, 3 million people. potentially it could go viral, if you will, get seen by a lot of people in a very short amount of time. So if you want to make the most impact, if you will, on Instagram, doing a Reels is going to get seen by the most amount of people. Now, if you're not up for doing video, that's fine. Use hashtags on your posts. And that's where you put in the hashtag, you leave a space before the next hashtag, and the hashtag is something that other people search for or click on. So a really great one to use on Instagram is Hermit Crabs of Instagram. It's a hashtag that I put in all of my posts. You can put it in your post, and you can see other people's hermit crabs. I look at that hashtag and find new accounts all the time that are adopting hermit crabs and are having hermit crabs for the very first time. Now, let's go to YouTube. Longer video format here, obviously. I am not super great at YouTube. I'm sure Crab Central Station could educate you on YouTube better than I could. Producing videos, good quality with good visual quality, good audio quality on a consistent basis is important to get seen or to get views. Also, having a title that is searchable, having a description in your video that is searchable, having closed captions on your video. These are all important things that could make your video get seen to more people. TikTok. I'm not on TikTok, but TikTok is another platform that you can use. If you post a good video on TikTok, it has the potential to reach a potentially huge audience. And you can cross-post that video from TikTok to Instagram or other platforms. And my tip there is to save the video to your phone without the TikTok watermark before you upload it to Instagram. Because if you upload a TikTok video with the TikTok little watermark symbol hovering around there onto Instagram, Instagram has started to reject those videos or to hide them in people's feeds. So people aren't going to see that as readily as a clear video with no watermarks whatsoever. There's other platforms out there. There's new platforms developing every day, and deciding which platform you want to use, I have two answers for you. One, use the platform that you already use. Two, use the platform that has the thing that has the media that you're most comfortable with. If you love video, you might rock on YouTube or TikTok. If you love text, like writing, maybe a blog is more up your alley. I know it's not social media, but it's in the wheelhouse. I love short text. You might consider Twitter. If you like short videos, TikTok, Instagram is going to be better than YouTube, obviously. And there's other things. So I hope this training session on advocating for hermit crabs through social media has been helpful to you. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to put them in the chat. I will be here answering those questions until the time runs out. I'd be happy to do that for you. So yeah, have a great rest of CrabCon. Why hermit? Hopefully you guys can't hear the traffic outside my window. All right.
Allison Copeland is the Biodiversity Officer for the Government of Bermuda's Department of Environment and Natural Resources. She completed a Master of Science degree in Geography at Memorial University of Newfoundland in Canada, then continued to work for the university as a research associate on seabed habitat mapping projects in the subarctic. In 2008, she returned home to Bermuda and began working in her current role as Biodiversity Officer for the Government of Bermuda. This role involves preparing and implementing invasive species control plans and endangered species recovery plans, as well as working with visiting scientists and students on research projects and liaising with NGOs on habitat management projects. At one time, Allison was caregiver for 2 hermit crabs who you will meet in her talk. Please welcome Allison Copeland.
Thanks for inviting me to speak to you about what we're doing in Bermuda towards conserving our land hermit crabs. I'm going to give you a bit of background on hermit crabs in Bermuda and their current status. Then I'm going to tell you about some of the recent development in terms of what new conservation work we're hoping to do. And I'm going to finish by asking a few questions of you all as a community of crab keepers. If you want to jot down thoughts as I go along, there's an email at the end of the presentation where you can send me your thoughts. I should begin by noting when we say land hermit crabs in Bermuda, what we mean is Cenobita clypeatus, because that is the only terrestrial hermit crab we have. So first off, where is Bermuda? Bermuda is a fishhook-shaped archipelago in the western North Atlantic. Our closest continental landmass is Cape Hatteras, North Carolina, which is just over 1,050 kilometers or 650 miles to the west. We are not in the Caribbean. We are about 1,400 kilometers northeast of the Bahamas. We do, however, share a number of species with the Caribbean and southeastern North America. Our flora and fauna have reached Bermuda either by swimming, flying, blowing in the wind, or drifting on ocean currents. Between North America and Bermuda is the Gulf Stream current, which brings warm water north from the Caribbean and gives Bermuda a subtropical climate. Bermuda itself is made up of about 300 islands. What we call mainland Bermuda is 7 large islands connected by bridges where the main population lives. There are a few inhabited outer islands and many small rocky islets. This is the geographic context in which we are doing our hermit crab conservation work. As you may have guessed from the fact that we are talking about hermit crab conservation, the population on Bermuda is not doing particularly well. We can ask ourselves, was it ever abundant? And why did it become rare? There is some evidence in the historic literature that suggests hermit crabs were once quite common on the islands. For example, this quote from 1907. Even later into the middle of the 20th century, it seems they were still quite common. Haas said in 1950 that they were everywhere in gardens and on hillsides. But look at this quote from just 40 years later. It considers hermit crabs to be near extinct in Bermuda. So what happened in the latter half of the 20th century to cause the population to drop? I'm going to explore that throughout this talk by showing you some of the threats and challenges that this species is facing. When starting a species conservation program, the obvious first question to answer is, how many are there? We do not have a hermit crab population assessment for Bermuda. A rough estimate of around 150 crabs was made by a visiting scientist in 1994. And today it is unlikely that the local population is more than a few hundred adults. They are mainly found along the east end of the island and along the south shore. This is mainly because the south shore is the less developed coast. It's also a distribution that mirrors the local distribution of the West Indian topshell, and I'll touch on topshells a little bit later. If you think back to the map of the Atlantic that I just showed, Bermuda is the northern limit of Cenobita clypeatus range, and our population is isolated from other sources of larvae. So correct me on this, but I believe the larval stage is about 1 month, and it takes 3 weeks for things floating in the Gulf Stream current to reach Bermuda from Florida. So we believe our local crab population is self-recruiting. We think the Bermudian hermit crab population now is small but stable following historic declines. After how many, where are they, is the next obvious question. On Bermuda, hermit crabs are found in shrubby coastal vegetation adjacent to the rocky shore, and in vegetated dunes at the back of sandy beaches. Occasionally they are found on unvegetated or sparsely vegetated rocky islets, where they are vulnerable to predation. In these habitats, they use a variety of hiding places. We have an invasive species of casuarina tree on our coasts, which drops a lot of needles, and hermit crabs will bury themselves in this leaf litter, as well as in beach sand. They are also found under rock ledges like these two on the slide. We often find many crabs gathered under ledges like this, where the limestone is moist and they are safe from predation. We have also found them inside rotting tree stumps and logs, and inside coastal caves. The crabs on the rocky offshore islets are really interesting. That is one of the little islands at the top of the slide. If you were here during a hurricane, the waves would be breaking over the top of the island. There is little low-growing vegetation on this island, but some of them have hardly any, so we really don't know what the crabs are surviving on or where they go to molt. Many of these offshore islands have important seasonal seabird colonies, so the crabs likely scavenge around the nests. Also, we put lots of rat bait around the bird colonies, and the crabs eat the bait in large quantities and take shelter inside the bait boxes. The bait is designed for iron-based rodent blood, so the crabs don't seem to be affected by it. The bait is designed to be appealing to rats, so there's probably something about it that tastes pretty good. We don't really know anything about the seasonal activity patterns of our hermit crabs. We don't know what they do in the winter. For a few weeks in January and February, our daytime temperatures are in the low to mid-60s Fahrenheit, with overnight lows into the high 50s. We presume the crabs become inactive when it's cold. Also, the timing of reproductive activity has not been studied. We have one confirmed record of a female with eggs from July 2010 at Hungry Bay. I wanted to show you this habitat in particular because this is the site where most of the studies on hermit crabs in Bermuda were done, and we think it's our largest colony. This is the mouth of Hungry Bay on the south shore of Bermuda. Where you see the white water at the bottom of the slide is the mouth of the bay, and there is this peninsula on one side of the mouth. On the inside of the peninsula is the calm water inside Hungry Bay and a now rapidly eroding mangrove swamp. On the outside of the peninsula, at the top of the slide, is the open Atlantic. As you can see, the peninsula is densely vegetated and has low relief rocky coast. Our tourism authority would like you to believe that Bermuda's coast looks like that beach I showed you on my title slide. In reality, most of our coast is rocky. Also, some parts are high relief and high energy, so not good habitat for crabs, and a coast that doesn't allow shells to collect. Wild crabs on Bermuda have been seen wearing the shells of a number of marine snails, like the beaded periwinkle, mangrove periwinkle, and several species of nerites. Occasionally, one of them, like the little guy at the bottom of the slide here, will pick up a milk snail shell. This is a terrestrial snail that is an abundant garden pest. The most popular shell choice, though, and the only choice for larger crabs, is Citaurium pica, which locally goes by the name of the West Indian topshell. Ben Godsall was a summer intern at the Bermuda Aquarium in 2000. He made some observations of hermit crabs at Hungry Bay. He reported that 77% of the crabs had shells that were either damaged or too small. The little guy at the top of the slide is wearing a beaded periwinkle shell that is clearly way too small for him. We found this crab on one of the offshore islands. That island has cliffs all around it, so even though there are lots of gastropods around it, their shells do not collect on the shoreline, so the choices for the crabs are very limited. Of the 85 crabs Ben Godsall collected, 81 were wearing sea pica shells. The modern story of these two species are entwined, and the fortunes of one depend on the other. So I have to go off on a tangent for a moment and tell you about topshell conservation. I'm sure as crab keepers most of you are familiar with the shells of this animal. I've put a picture of his face there in the middle of the slide in case you've not seen it before. The early settlers in Bermuda considered the West Indian topshell a prized food item. Here was this large source of protein that could be easily picked up along the shore whenever the tide was out. So they ate them in really large quantities for about 150 years. By the mid-1800s, the West Indian topshell was locally extinct in Bermuda. We're not sure of the timeline of when this loss started to affect the hermit crab numbers. There are conflicting accounts in the scientific literature. Some say the hermit crabs survived on Bermuda using fossil or subfossil shells which had eroded out of the limestone, but others dispute this. Obviously, the loss of the main species producing large shells must have been a factor in the decline of hermit crabs historically. The topshell was reintroduced to Bermuda from the Caribbean in 1982 and legally protected under the Fisheries Act in 1989. They have spread from the east end of the island where they were reintroduced, along the south shore where they're now really abundant. They're uncommon still at the west end of the island or along the north shore. Happily though, you can now find places that look like these two photographs, with topshells of all sizes grazing on the shoreline and in tide pools. To some degree, the historic loss of topshells is the one threat to hermit crabs that has been positively dealt with. However, now that topshells are once again becoming common, we have a few new challenges. There have been some recent prosecutions for topshell poaching, mainly by fishermen looking for bait, and it still occurs. For example, this photograph of 165 topshells was found by a group doing a coastal trash cleanup. Shell collecting and souvenir hunting has now become a problem as well. The border control agents screening departing passengers at the airport confiscate shells, coral, sand, and other things people are trying to take out of the country, both because it violates our laws and because they might be a biosecurity risk in the receiving country. In a typical 2-week period, around 8 pounds of shells are confiscated at the airport. This adds up to a minimum of 208 pounds of shells a year. And that's just the airport, and that's just what is found. Most of our tourists arrive and depart on cruise ships, so the actual number of shells that are being taken is probably many times greater. The upshot of all this illegal collecting is that the airport authorities give us the shells to return to the environment, so we put them back into habitats where we know hermit crabs have been seen. Many of the threats our endangered species face can be linked to the overpopulation of humans on Bermuda. If any of you have visited Bermuda, you will know that our landscape looks like this. We have a country that is 54 square kilometers, or 21 square miles, of land area, inhabited by 65,000 residents, and visited by 800,000 visitors per year. We have one of the highest human population densities in the world. Many of the threats faced by land hermit crabs are linked to this dense human population. For example, habitat loss and alteration through human causes like foreshore development. All of the few remaining wild areas on Bermuda are overrun with invasive plant and animal species. Also, the habitats have been fragmented by the construction of walls, fences, roads, buildings, and other things that separate crabs from available food, shelter, mates, and safe access to the ocean. Crabs are also exposed to traffic, lights, and noise from man-made sources. Also, Bermuda is experiencing more frequent hurricanes. We've had 7 direct hits from hurricanes in the last 8 years. This is causing serious erosion along the coast and strips the sand and vegetation from the habitats. So the crabs that survive the storm surge and flooding, are then made more vulnerable to predators. Artificial hardening and steepening of the shoreline reduces the ability of the shoreline to accumulate gastropod shells for hermit crabs to use. The photos at the bottom of this slide are two examples of shoreline structures built to prevent erosion and protect coastal developments. With sea level rise and more frequent and intense hurricanes, we will see more structures like these. Such structures make it difficult, if not impossible, for female crabs to reach the ocean to release eggs. Females venturing down to the sea at night in the summer months are also liable to encounter something that looks like the scene in the top left photo on this slide. We have no information on what effect human activities on beaches at night are having on our wildlife. The crab in the rat trap there at the top right is what we call a red land crab. Historically, red land crabs were incredibly abundant on Bermuda. Beginning in around the 1950s, both the government and private entities began to persecute the red land crab as a pest, because they damaged crops and they dug holes all over the place. Huge amounts of poison were used to try and control them. Undoubtedly, the land hermit crabs, which share habitat with the red land crab, also took up these poison baits. In an attempt to reduce the amount of poison being used, particularly on the golf courses, to control the red land crabs, a biocontrol solution was found. Yellow-crowned night herons are known predators of land crabs. A few chicks were imported in the early 1980s and released on Bermuda, where they have multiplied and spread over the entire country. They have successfully reduced the red land crab population to a small fraction of its former abundance. I remember as a child in the 1980s seeing red land crabs squashed on the road in their hundreds during their spawning migration. Now I think it's been years since I've seen a single one. Unfortunately, but unsurprisingly, we've found evidence that the herons also kill land hermit crabs, but the actual extent of the predation is unknown. The great kiskadee is a flycatcher species that was imported in 1957 to control an overabundance of an imported lizard. This bird is considered one of our worst invasive species. They will eat pretty much anything they can catch, and Bermuda has an unnaturally high population density of kiskadees. We have evidence that they eat small crabs of other species, so it's very likely they're also eating land hermit crabs when they can catch them. Other invasive species that are also possibly affecting the hermit crabs are Argentine ants and two species of rats. These will likely compete with the crabs for scavenging opportunities, as well as attacking the crabs when given the opportunity. So that's the situation with the crabs. Now I'm going to share with you some recent developments. We'll start with me. I'm a recent development when it comes to hermit crabs. I'm a plant person and a geographer and an ecologist by training. I have a limited knowledge of crabs, and I got involved with them because it was a niche that needed to be filled. When we went into COVID-19 lockdown last April, I wrote a recovery plan for Caenobita clypeatus from my kitchen table, using my limited knowledge and what I could find online. I still don't spend much time on crab work, and we don't have an active crab conservation program at present, but I'd like to change that, and we now have a framework in the management plan. Bermuda has a Protected Species Act that was passed in 2003. This is the law that protects animals and plants that are threatened in some way or need conservation management. That act says that what you can and cannot do to a protected species. Under the Act, we make an order, which is the list of species to which the Act applies, and they are regularly updated. The land hermit crab was protected on the Protected Species Order for the first time in 2012. On the most recent order from 2016, it is listed as vulnerable and a level 2 species. This means that the penalty on conviction for an offense involving land hermit crabs is $15,000 US or 1 year in prison. Things that are considered an offense are the willful damaging, killing, injuring, or disturbance of a protected species, and the destruction, removal, or obstruction of its habitat. Also, taking, importing, exporting, selling, purchasing, or transporting a protected species or its parts is considered an offense. The listing of the hermit crab resulted in this rather unfortunate headline in the newspaper. It's slightly overdramatic, but it brought some public attention to the Protected Species Act. One of the stipulations of the Protected Species Act is that each listed species must have either a recovery plan or a management plan. This is the Land Hermit Crab Management Plan that was written in April, May, and June 2020. I've put the link there to it if you want to have a look at it. The plan summarizes the few previous studies done by local students and some of the relevant international scientific literature. The final section makes some recommendations on how to achieve better conservation status and learn more about the crabs. It is a mix of science and management. You'll see from the file name that it says redacted. That is because we obscure the exact coordinates of protected species before putting the documents on the internet. Through preparation of this plan, the gaps in our knowledge have been highlighted. We now have a list of what we don't know. The broad aim of the plan is to improve the conservation status of hermit crabs. We feel that we will have done this when we have evidence that the population is stable, or better yet, increasing. When we have increased our knowledge of the crab population, when critical crab habitats have been identified and protected, and if we can, we want to improve the quality of those habitats. We will need to have identified and addressed threats, and hopefully we will have the public support. Protected species recovery is not rocket science. You make more and you spread them around. This is really what differentiates a management plan from a recovery plan. In both, you conserve the population that is left, protect the habitat, reduce or eliminate the threats, and if possible, you make more individuals and you spread them to new sites within appropriate habitats. For the land hermit crab, we don't yet have that ability to make more crabs. That is why we have a management plan and not a protected species recovery plan. It is hoped that if we take all those management steps, the crabs will be able to make more crabs on their own. I understand there's some amongst you that have in fact been able to successfully breed hermit crabs in captivity, which is marvelous. We would be very keen to understand how that knowledge could be used for protected species recovery projects. For now, though, we're focused on management activities to help the wild crabs, and we plan to tackle the knowledge gaps with some new research. The basic first question when you're managing an endangered species is how many are there? Followed by, where are they? So we need an accurate assessment of the abundance and distribution of our hermit crab population. Once we have a repeatable method and first numbers, we can redo the counting and mapping periodically to look for upward or downward trends in the population. We're thinking of using timed baited transects to look at relative abundance in a location. So any thoughts on what would be the best bait to use would be welcome. I've read some studies where coffee grounds, tuna oil, wet dog food, and bacon grease were used as bait for wild Clypeus. If you know of a treat that your crabs can't resist, we'd like to hear it. It would be best to set baits at sites to do preliminary presence-absence surveys for hermit crabs before committing to a time-intensive abundance survey. Abundance surveys would involve some sort of capture, mark, recapture method to calculate the number of individual crabs at a site. We've done some marking and measuring in the past, as you can see from these photos from 2010, which was a quick survey with middle school students at Hungry Bay. It is the marking that presents a bit of a challenge. For the statistics to give a valid result in a mark recapture study, you have to be certain that you've identified a marked individual when you encounter it again, so the mark can't fade or rub off. Marking hermit crabs on the shell is easy. Like my little friend there in the photo, you can stick something to the shell, or you can paint on it. Obviously, if the crab then switches shells with another crab, or ditches the shell for an unmarked one, then you're going to get a population estimate from your statistics that's not going to be accurate. The obvious answer then is to mark the crab's body. The challenge is how to mark it in an ethical way. I've read some really horrific methods for permanently marking crustaceans in a way that is visible after molting. We need a method that isn't cruel and isn't going to harm the animals, because after all, we're doing this because they're locally endangered. I understand that some of you have determined methods for identifying individual hermit crabs, and I'd be very interested to hear about it, and perhaps we can apply it to these wild crabs. Something else we need to study is the crab's use of their habitat. This includes all parts of the habitat, including food items and other resources like shells. Studying their habitat use and diet will let us know, as managers, what we can do to make life a bit easier for the crabs. For example, we can plant some of their favorite food plants once we know what those are. Should we build structures for shelter in the habitats is another question. Having somewhere to hide from the herons will definitely improve their chances of survival, but what should those structures look like? Log piles, rock piles, or something like that. Also, given that the number of hurricanes affecting Bermuda each year has increased significantly, do we need to consider translocating some of the hermit crabs off the low-lying offshore islands and onto higher ground? Would it help the crabs out if we provided fresh water somehow in their habitat? I've read accounts of hermit crabs gathering around troughs used for watering cattle in the Caribbean. So we're curious, do we need to provide fresh water for them? Obviously, they've gotten by all right without it up until this point, but would it make their lives easier if we did? And if we do provide it, how should we do it? We're interested in the migration of spawning crabs to the sea. We don't think in Bermuda that they move very far, but that is speculation. Marking the crabs would help us answer this question also. We have no shortage of shells thanks to the airport and other sources, so we want to look at how best to provide these shells to the crabs. We'd like to put caches of marked shells on the beaches, in the dunes behind the beach, and in the coastal forest to see from where the most shells are picked up. Something we have done with other endangered species is establish new colonies through translocation, and we want to explore the possibility of doing that for the crabs. I would like to gain a better understanding of how they use territories, because we already move them around quite a lot, and we don't really know much about how that affects them. At the moment, we get crabs brought to us by members of the public, because they've found them in the road, or in their yard, or in their house. And in these cases where the crabs have been brought to us, usually we take them to one of the few sites where we know there are hermit crab populations, and we let them go. Since land hermit crabs are gregarious, I hope that when we do this, they just go off and join the others, but we aren't sure. Some of our other native crabs are solitary and guard their territories aggressively, so putting a new crab into the habitat likely would end in injury or death for someone. Last year, we started a bit of a publicity campaign to make the public aware that several species of land crabs migrate to spawn. We encouraged people to assess the situation carefully before picking the crab up and bringing it to us. If the crab was not in immediate danger or trapped somewhere, we wanted people to leave them alone to get on with going where they were going. In the past, we've removed hermit crabs from the offshore islands where the Bermuda petrel breeds. This is our national bird, which has a global population of 300 birds. We do this for two reasons. Firstly, because the crabs undermine our rodent control efforts on the nesting islands by eating the rat poison as fast as we can put it out. And secondly, because the birds nest in burrows underground, and the chick is left alone in the burrow a lot of the time. We don't think the crabs would harm the chicks, but we don't want to take the chance. So when the crabs start to get large, we move them off the bird islands. Obviously, if we want to start a new colony of happy crabs, we need to be able to tell the males from the females to ensure that we can translocate both. And I must say, the Crab Keeper forums online were really helpful with information on how to tell the sex of hermit crabs. So in summary, here are a few ideas I've pulled together of things I've talked about in the last few slides. These are some of the areas that we as protected species managers want to gain knowledge, and I think we can gain some of that knowledge from you in the Crab Keeper community. Mark and recapture. I've heard there's a promising method of using the CETE to recognize crabs. Maybe we can try that. We need methods that will work in the field, so I don't want to be painting them bright colors or anything like that, which will draw a predator's eye. And ideally, we'd like to find a method that will be good for at least 8 months. What treats would you suggest using as bait for counting studies? Providing water. Should we be trying to provide fresh water in habitats during dry periods? And what would be a good way to do it? Sometimes we make freshwater features in restoration projects for the birds, so how would we go about making these usable for the crabs? Shelter use. Do they retreat to the nearest damp, shady spot during the day, or do they have their own spot that they like to return to? And therefore, is moving them really disruptive? We would love it if you wanted to share any literature with us. Things that we can quote from, like links to articles and newsletters, would be really helpful. We have some limited access to scientific publications, but we would be happy to get those as well. The photos in the online crab keeper forums were really helpful when learning how to sex crabs for translocation. You all spend time with these animals, so I'd really encourage sharing more photos online. When I wrote the plan, I was looking for an anatomical diagram to use, and I couldn't find one that didn't look like a cartoon or wasn't inaccurate in some way. There were some that are great works of art, but the legs are arranged incorrectly. I ended up drawing one of my own for the plan, which admittedly is not great. I'd encourage anyone who is artistically inclined to have a go at a proper drawing. We're keen to talk to anyone studying Caenobita clypeatus that might be interested in using Bermuda as a data point. We are the northern limit of its native range, so we might have something interesting for you. If you have thoughts on any of these or anything I've said during the talk or suggestions, the email for the Department of the Environment is environment@gov.bm. You can send an email there with my name in it, and I've put my name there on the slide. The other area where I think you all would have some insight is how we manage our biosecurity concerns around the trade in pet hermit crabs. We have some very strict biosecurity protocols that prevent the importation of any plant or animal material without a permit. The Customs Department took these 2 little crabs shown on the slide from an airline passenger who arrived with them from New York without declaring them. Customs delivered the crabs to us at the Department of the Environment to dispose of. We had no way to screen them for diseases, and because they had no paperwork, we had no idea where they came from or how they had been kept. We recognized that it was a protected species, but obviously not from local stock. In Bermuda, because of our isolation, we do find that species we share with the Caribbean, Florida, etc. sometimes show genetic differences here. Often we have our own little self-sustaining populations. We're not sure if our hermit crabs are genetically distinct from crabs in the pet trade, so out of an abundance of caution, we don't want to mix pet trade Caenobita clypeatus with our native ones. This is how I became a hermit crab foster parent. I inherited the 2 confiscated hermit crabs. We were going to terminate them, but I wanted to see if we could keep them for protected species awareness events, plus they were pretty entertaining. When I got them, they were both wearing artificial ceramic shells. One was bright red, and the other was bright yellow with SpongeBob SquarePants painted on it. I gave them my childhood shell collection to poke through, and within 2 hours, SpongeBob had ditched his ceramic shell for a pica shell. Red took about a month to give up his ceramic shell. This unexpected encounter with pet hermit crabs raised a few issues. At the moment, imported crabs are banned completely, but the pet shops have historically brought them in. There are logistical and legal issues with a pet trade in what is now a legally protected native species. As a Level 2 protected species under the Protected Species Act, the local collection of Caenobita clypeatus is prohibited, as is the sale and purchase of specimens sourced from overseas. We could be open to the importation of other hermit crab species as pets if they don't pose a biosecurity threat. So we would need to know firstly, how do we screen imported pet hermit crabs for pests and diseases? And are diseases even a problem with hermit crabs? If anyone has thoughts on that, I'd be interested to hear them. Also, I'm assuming that other species of Cenobita are not likely to crossbreed with Clypeatus, but if anyone knows of this happening, I'd like to know that too. I wanted to finish with this quote, which is on the back cover of the management plan. William Beebe worked in Bermuda in the 1930s, where he famously made the first deep dive to the ocean floor in a bathysphere. He seemed quite taken with the wildlife around his base on the outer islands. The quote says, "If we live out our span of life on Earth without ever knowing a crab intimately, we have missed out on a jolly good friendship." Thanks for listening, and do get in touch if you have any thoughts to share. Enjoy the rest of the convention.
Tammy Wyke's first hermit crab came into her life in 7th grade, and she has had hermit crabs ever since for the past 43 years. Using what she learned from her crabs over the years, in April 2005, she opened the Crabbage Patch at her local flea market. Tammy's philosophy was to keep things simple, provide accurate information, and try to mimic what hermit crabs would find in the wild. Some of her early unique products and practices are now commonly found throughout the hermit crab industry. The discovery that hermit crabs like worm castings, developing a moist sand substrate mix for successful molts, and selling shells by opening size, to name just a few. From there, she opened a local retail shop, changed the name to the Hermit Crab Patch, and created an online store which she currently runs with the help of her husband, Kirk. Tammy says she feels very fortunate to be able to have a business that is also her passion for the last 15 years. Please welcome Tammy Wyke.
In order to grow, a hermit crab must shed its hard outer covering called an exoskeleton. This process is known as ecdysis, or molting, and happens throughout its entire life. My introduction to molting came as an unexpected surprise back in 1995. My husband Kirk and I were sitting in our backyard in South Florida one day. My Jumbo, which I had named the Professor, was out with us exploring the backyard. As we were talking, I glanced over to check on him and saw that he was over near one of the trees and starting to dig in the ground. We decided to let him be and keep an eye on what he was doing. As the time progressed, we both watched in fascination as he continued to dig and eventually cover himself up completely. At this point, I wasn't quite sure what to do. I didn't know why he would bury, but trusted his instinct to do so. Worried that I would lose him when he resurfaced in a couple of days, I put a laundry basket upside down over the area where he had buried, and then placed a heavy cinder block on top to keep it in place. I imagine you all know what happened next. Many times a day, day after day after day, I would go out and check on him, but nothing. I was getting really worried since he didn't have food or water, and I was beginning to lose hope, but for some reason still resisted the urge to try and dig him up. A couple of days turned into a couple of months, but I would still check on him regularly. Then it happened. One day during month 3, I saw a small hole appear near where he had buried. I pulled off the laundry basket, looked closer, and I could actually see the Professor moving just below the surface. There were pieces of his large claw, leg tips, and a few other parts of his exoskeleton that were in with him. His exoskeleton was shiny, deep brown, and he had needle-sharp leg tips and a lot of shiny blonde fur. He had molted. This was a light bulb moment for me. Up until now, I had been keeping him in a tank with a few inches of dry beach sand, and he wouldn't have been able to bury. Thanks to the Professor, I began my search to learn more about the process of molting. I started searching for molting information, and the first book I came across was by Dorothy Bliss. called Shrimps, Lobsters, and Crabs, Their Fascinating Life Story. Her book explained the molting process and so much more. I also had access to the University of Miami's Rosenstiel Library, where I found the book The Biology of Crabs. It contained a section written by G.F. Warner on crab growth and molting that I was able to take notes from. Neither of these books address molting and land hermit crabs specifically, but they gave me a general understanding of the molting process. As a result of this information, and what the professor had taught me, Kirk decided to build my first outdoor cage. The earth was the bottom of the cage, so our crabs were free to bury whenever they wanted to. I also started giving my crabs a bowl of salt water made with Instant Ocean, in addition to the fresh water I had been giving them all along. In The Biology of the Land Crabs, another great book that I had found, Peter Greenaway explained how hermit crabs store water in the back of their shells and regulate it to the proper salinity they need by mixing fresh and salt water. With my new outdoor cage, I had plenty of space for more hermit crabs, and my colony grew. All of my crabs were now able to bury and molt successfully. When I started my hermit crab business 10 years later, one of the first products we developed was our pre-mixed sand substrate. We stressed to our customers that they needed to provide their hermit crabs with deep, moist sand substrate in order for the crabs to successfully molt in captivity. While gathering information to do this presentation, I spent many hours on Google Scholar to see what information I could find. I wasn't able to find any molt staging studies on land hermit crabs or the related coconut crab, which was surprising and disappointing. The information I found involved studies on blue crabs, lobsters, crayfish, and other crustaceans, many of which have importance as food sources in commercial industry. So I've had to extrapolate from studies on other crustaceans due to the lack of information available on hermit crab molting. For those of you not familiar with molting, Warwick Fletcher gives us a general overview of the molting process in the coconut crab, a close relative of the land hermit crab. He writes, "Coconut crabs have a special behavioral adaptation for molting in the terrestrial environment, which they often accomplish in a subterranean burrow. Before the crab molts, its abdomen becomes greatly enlarged due to a rapid accumulation of fluid. The crabs first dig a burrow in soft earth areas, away from their usual rocky habitats. The tunnels of adult crabs may extend for about 1 meter and to a depth of ½ meter. As the crab digs, it replaces the earth behind it so that only a fan of disturbed soil is left to indicate the position of the entrance. The crab molts in a chamber which is roughly circular and at least twice the crab's volume. Minerals are resorbed from the old exoskeleton, which ultimately splits at the joint between thorax and abdomen due to an increase in internal hydrostatic pressure. The crab slowly pulls out of the old exoskeleton over a period of 1 to 2 hours, revealing the new soft pale blue-white exoskeleton. The crab remains immobile for some days while its exoskeleton begins to harden. Subsequently, it consumes the old shell or exuvium, which enables minerals such as calcium to be recycled. This appears to contribute to the hardening of the new shell. The time taken to complete the entire process is related to the size of the crab. Larger crabs may take as long as 3 to 4 weeks to finish eating the exuvium, and for the exoskeleton to harden sufficiently for the crab to emerge. Thus, up to 1.5 months may be required to complete the entire molting process in large individuals. I will begin the discussion of the land hermit crab molt cycle with an overview of the 4 stages of molting. Looking further into each stage, I will focus on what is physically and physiologically happening with the hermit crab. I'll introduce the basic hormones involved in each stage and look at limb regeneration in a crab that has lost a leg or claw. As mentioned, there are 4 main stages to a hermit crab's molt cycle: intermolt, premolt, ecdysis, and postmolt. These stages are often broken down to specific substages, but for our purposes I will simply refer to them as early, mid, or late. Beginning with intermolt, the hermit crab has completed molting and is above the surface living its life. The hermit crab senses it is time to molt again and begins to enter premolt. Premolt is all about preparing for the upcoming molt, stocking up on food and water, and digging underground. The third stage, ecdysis, is a brief stage where the hermit crab actually sheds its exoskeleton. In stage 4, postmolt, the hermit crab hardens up. It eats its old exoskeleton and resurfaces to once again begin intermolt. The integument or exoskeleton, which is the hard outer covering of a hermit crab, is composed of 4 different layers above the epidermis, which secretes each layer. In this image depicting a fully developed exoskeleton, the outermost layer is called the epicuticle, and it acts as a protective layer. It is primarily made up of lipids, proteins, and calcium, and doesn't contain chitin. Next is the exocuticle that contains chitin, proteins, and calcium. Together, these 2 layers comprise the preexuvial layer since they are deposited before a molt. After that comes the endocuticle, which is made up of chitin, proteins, and calcium. Finally, the membranous layer sits below the endocuticle and on top of the epidermis. It consists of chitin and protein, but it is not calcified. Together, these 2 layers are called the postecdesial layer, since they are formed after the molt. Pore canals stemming from the epidermis are seen as vertical lines on the right side of the image. They are involved in the deposit of calcium and other minerals needed to harden the exoskeleton after shedding. The hormonal processes involved in molting are very complex. To simplify things, I will give a general overview. Molting is controlled by a neurosecretory center located in the eye stalks, called the X-organ sinus gland complex. This organ produces and stores a neuropeptide called molt inhibiting hormone, or MIH. When MIH is secreted into the hemolymph of the crab, similar to our blood, it acts to conversely affect the release of molting hormones. The molting gland is called the Y organ, and it consists of a pair of glands located in the cephalothorax, or head and back region, that produce and secrete into the hemolymph exosteroids, also known as molting hormones, or MH. Molting occurs when molting inhibiting hormones are reduced to a point that allows for maximum flow of molting hormones in the hemolymph. The timing of this decrease in molt inhibiting hormone and increase in molting hormone can be affected by both external environmental conditions and the internal health of a hermit crab. Dorothy Bliss discusses that factors that favor successful molting appear to cause the withholding of the molt inhibiting hormone. She says, these factors are darkness, solitude, warmth, and moisture, the same factors that prevail at the bottom of a crab's burrow. Should environmental factors become unfavorable, should there be light, other crabs nearby, cold or heat, dryness, the molt inhibiting hormone is released into the circulation, and proecdysis, also known as premolt, is delayed for the period of time that the environment remains unfavorable. Internal health factors may also cause molt-inhibiting hormone to remain high and delay molting. When a crab loses a limb, it will need time to generate a new limb bud at the base of the severed limb. If it is malnourished, it will delay molting to allow enough time to uptake the water and nutrition it needs to survive molting. Regardless of the factors that cause the molt-inhibiting hormone to remain high, there is a point where the crab can delay molting no longer. From our observations, we have seen crabs at this point attempt a surface molt, usually unsuccessfully, withdrawing from the old exoskeleton only partially. Or they might start to become very lethargic, begin dropping limbs and claws, and eventually die. It is critical to a hermit crab's long-term survival that when the molt-inhibiting hormone is at its lowest and molting hormone is flowing at its highest, the crab is safely buried and able to complete its molt. Intermolt, which comprises most of the time between molts, is the longest stage in the molt cycle and a hermit crab's life. During this time, the crab is above ground, actively eating, drinking, and living its life. It needs to rebuild its metabolic reserves, such as calcium, lipids, carbohydrate, and proteins that were depleted during its last molt. At the start of intermolt, tissue growth continues until the membranous layer has been secreted and the exoskeleton is considered to be complete and fully calcified. During this phase, any legs or claws that were lost begin regeneration. Regrowth begins as a papilla and then progresses to develop into a small limb bud, which is folded upon itself inside a cuticular sac. The limb bud remains small during intermolt until molting preparation begins in premolt. Molting hormone levels circulating in the hemolymph or blood remain low during intermolt when the crab is not molting or preparing to molt. Molt-inhibiting hormone secreted in a pulsatile fashion acts to keep the Y organ that secretes molting hormones in its basal or resting state. The onset of premolt begins with preparations for the upcoming molt. At the beginning of this phase, hermit crabs continue to store nutrients and water needed to sustain them during their impending molt. Their enlarged abdomens and protruding fluid-filled abdominal lobes, commonly referred to as molt sacs, are external signs that the time to bury is drawing near. Other signs, such as eyes that appear cloudy and declining activity levels, may be noticed as well. There are many changes occurring in the exoskeleton at this time. The membranous layer of the exoskeleton is digested by enzymes, causing the separation of the endocuticle from the epidermis, which is known as apolysis. This separation creates a space where the epidermis can now produce the first two layers of the new exoskeleton, which are deposited before the molt. They consist of both the epicuticle and the exocuticle. The epicuticle, which will become the new outer layer of the exoskeleton, is insoluble to protect it from being digested by the active molting fluid, which is produced to break down the old endocuticle layer. Both layers remain flexible until after shedding. Muscle attachment fibers become elongated, anchoring the new epicuticle and exocuticle to the old exoskeleton, allowing basic movements until the exoskeleton has been shed. Calcium, minerals, and other organic components are being withdrawn from the old exoskeleton and reabsorbed. In hermit crabs, this can give a chalky appearance to the exoskeleton and is another visual cue in early pre-molt that the time to molt is drawing near. In preparation for the upcoming molt, molting hormone levels begin to increase in early pre-molt as the Y organ's sensitivity to molt inhibiting hormone decreases. At this time, the Y organ becomes activated due to the fall in molt inhibiting hormone levels, leading to changes occurring in preparation for the upcoming molt. During mid-pre-molt, as levels of molting hormones in the hemolymph continue to rise and remain at their highest levels, the Y organ enters the committed state. The hermit crab must molt due to the very high levels of molting hormones and the insensitivity of the Y organ to molt inhibiting hormones. Finally, in late pre-molt, after reaching a peak in molting hormone levels, there is a sudden fall in hemolymph levels of molting hormone, leading the Y organ to enter the repressed state, which remains throughout ecdysis. During this phase, limb buds grow rapidly and become fully developed. However, they still remain folded and fully encased in their sac of cuticle, waiting to unfold at ecdysis. Another interesting occurrence near the end of pre-molt is atrophy of the large claw muscle. This is necessary to ensure that it is able to be withdrawn through its very narrow joint when molting occurs. Pre-molt ends when resorption of the old exoskeleton is complete. Ecdysis, which is the actual shedding of the old exoskeleton, is the shortest phase in the molt cycle. At the beginning of ecdysis, water previously stored in the crab's hemolymph, which is similar to our blood, along with the water stored in the molt sacs, is used to create hydrostatic pressure. As the crab swells, the brittle exoskeleton is split along predetermined lines. The hermit crab's abdomen remains in its shell with the body of the crab extending outward while it sheds. Muscular movements enable the crab to pull out of the old exoskeleton, and stored fluids expand the soft, new exoskeleton after this occurs. Limb buds that were previously folded in their protective sac unfold and begin to expand as well. Once the crab is fully free of its old exoskeleton, it retracts back into its shell. The crab uses the shell to help mold the new soft exoskeleton during calcification, which is the hardening of the new exoskeleton. This photo shows an exoskeleton that has been shed completely intact. You can see the blotchy areas on his legs and claws where calcium and mineral resorption has occurred prior to shedding. I've turned the exoskeleton around in this photo so that you are looking into the cephalothorax, which is the head and back. You can see the cuticle covering the gills has been shed, along with portions of the digestive system that are lined with cuticle. The visible crack on a segment of the large claw called the meris allows the large claw to be more easily withdrawn. Finally, you can see the telson and uropods located at the end of the abdomen, which are used by the crab to hold on to its shell. Here is a good picture of a freshly molted crab pulled back into its shell. Notice the light color of the new exoskeleton and how the crab is using the shell to help shape its soft body. At the start of post-molt, the freshly molted hermit crab is soft, pale, and vulnerable. Its new exoskeleton only consists of the 2 layers that had been formed before ecdysis. Now the 3rd layer, called the endocuticle, forms. Also, muscle and tissue inside of the large claw is restored. The soft exoskeleton begins to harden up through a process called sclerotization, also referred to as tanning, and the crab's color becomes darker. Now the crab is able to begin eating its shed exoskeleton for the calcium and other minerals that it contains. Calcification occurs and the new membranous layer forms to complete the new exoskeleton. Finally, the crab resurfaces and the molt cycle is complete. Once the molt has been completed, the Y organ increases its sensitivity to molt inhibiting hormone in post-molt and rapidly returns to its basal or resting state. The new limb that was regenerated is a smaller version of what had been lost, and its color may be different than normal. It may take 2 or 3 more molts for it to grow to normal size. For years, I kept a molting diary where I documented all of my pet crabs' molts. As my crab population grew, I was able to see trends develop that appeared to vary based on crab size. For instance, small crabs that are actively growing and molting more frequently tend not to remain buried as long as older, larger crabs. Following is a basic timeline regarding size, molting length, and frequency that I took from the information that I gathered. This is a guideline and not engraved in stone. Tiny crabs with shells that are about the size of a dime will bury for about 2 weeks, many times per year. Small crabs about the size of a quarter will bury up to a month, 3 to 4 times per year. Medium crabs about the size of a golf ball will bury for 1 to 2 months, 1 to 2 times per year. Large crabs about the size of a tennis ball will bury for 2 to 3 months, 1 time per year. Jumbo crabs wearing shells about the size of a baseball or larger will bury for 3 months every year or so. Using these observations, I put together this chart that relates crab size, molt frequency, and recommended minimum safe substrate depth. A copy of this chart can be found on our premix substrate product page. Personally, I believe that it is extremely important to set your tank up with a uniform substrate that is deep enough for your largest crab. Making the substrate a uniform depth across the bottom of the tank maximizes the area available for molting and minimizes the chance that a molting crab will be disturbed by one of the other crabs. A good rule of thumb is to make your substrate 3 to 4 times as deep as your largest crab shell is tall. The substrate should also be moist enough to pack well. Hermit crabs tend to bury deep for better protection, and will create an underground burrow about twice their size in which to molt. Using this rule will ensure that they are able to stay protected when they are most vulnerable. I don't recommend using isolation tanks for molting, since it isn't always possible to know exactly when your crabs are ready to molt. By using deep, uniform substrate in your tank, you are eliminating the guesswork and your tank will be ready when each crab decides to molt. There are times when you may have a crab that is physically unable to bury to molt. Some examples are a crab that has lost multiple limbs, a crab that has resurfaced but is too weak to rebury, or if you need to relocate your crabitat during a move. In situations such as these, I've had success using a molting bin to get the crab through its molt. These are the supplies you will need to create a molting bin. First, a dark colored file box or bin with a snap-on lid. Second, enough moist sand substrate mixture to fill the bin almost to the top. Third, a plastic flower pot saucer that fits into the bin, leaving an inch or two between the saucer and the bin wall. The procedure I use for creating the molting bin is as follows. First, using the moist substrate, fill the bin almost to the top and pack it firmly. Second, in the center of the bin, you will want to dig a hole deep enough that your crab cannot easily climb out of, but not all the way to the bottom of the bin. The hole should be wide enough that your crab has room to move without touching the sides, about 2 to 3 times the width of its shell. Third, before putting the crab into the hole, I always place the crab in the food dish and each water dish one last time, allowing it time to eat and drink if needed. And fourth, when ready, set the crab into the hole you made and cover it with the flower pot saucer, using it upside down. You want to make sure that the saucer completely covers the opening and is well supported by the surrounding sand before snapping on the bin lid. While in the bin, you should briefly check on your crab periodically to see if it has molted. Sometimes a crab may bury further into the side of the hole, but as long as the lid has remained secure, you don't need to worry that your crab has escaped. After the crab is molted and eaten most of the exoskeleton and its color is close to normal, you can return it to the crabitat. If it doesn't feel quite ready to face the other crabs, it may bury for a short period of time. I also remove any leftover exoskeleton from the bin and crush it for all of the crabs to eat. Originally, I had to disturb this crab from her molt due to an upcoming renovation project. When I gently dug down to find her, she had already been buried for 45 days. She was about 2 feet down near the bottom of our large indoor cage. When I pulled her out of the substrate, her exoskeleton was blotchy from calcium and mineral resorption, but she hadn't molted yet. This picture was taken during her 3rd week in the molting bin. You can see she's had a successful molt, but still has quite a bit of exoskeleton left to eat, and her color is fairly light. It was too early to remove her from the bin. Using a molting bin can be a real lifesaver. I've used this technique successfully many times over the years, and have helped my customers do the same. In conclusion, molting is a critical process necessary for growth and survival in hermit crabs. It involves a complex, well-coordinated interplay of numerous neuropeptide and steroid hormones, physiological changes, and environmental influences. When all goes as intended, a successful molt occurs. A working knowledge of the molt cycle is important for hermit crab owners so that they know what to expect and what to provide so that their pet hermit crabs survive during this vulnerable time and thrive long term. My approach to caring for hermit crabs has always been to keep things simple and to simulate what crabs would have access to in the wild. For successful molting, you will want to provide a tank that is large enough that your crabs don't feel overcrowded. Fewer crabs kept together is safer than having too many. Fill the tank uniformly with moist substrate to a depth that accommodates safe molting of your largest crab. Provide both a freshwater and saltwater bowl so that your crabs can create whatever salinity water they require for molting, drinking, and carrying as shell water. Provide a variety of foods rich in fats, proteins, carbohydrates, calcium, and phytochemicals needed to sustain them when they molt. Finally, trust that when given what they need, your hermit crabs will do as nature intended, and of course resist the temptation to disturb your crabs once they have buried. These simple steps will allow your hermit crabs the freedom to molt whenever they are ready, allowing you to enjoy your pets for many years to come.
By day, and for the past 24 years, Sherry Werdebaugh has taught writing courses at Bowling Green State University in Ohio. However, she has been fascinated with and curious about the natural world, insects, reptiles, amphibians, mosses, lichens, and fungi in particular, for her entire life. Her favorite and most requested books have always been field guides. She had pet hermit crabs as a child, as so many of us did, and of course they didn't survive more than a few months due to the gross lack of knowledge surrounding their care at the time. Decades later, she took the plunge again, with 3 small to medium crabs in a 10-gallon tank, and has now been keeping hermits for over 4 years, far more successfully than she did as a child in the 80s. Her crew includes purple pinchers, some of which are Mary's captive bred babies adopted in person at the very first CrabCon in 2019, Ecuadorians, 2 adopted strawberries, and 1 viola. She is grateful to have found CSJ, and by extension LHCOS, and has grown to love so many fellow hermit crab fans who have since become wonderful friends. Please welcome Sherry Werdebaugh.
Hey everyone, welcome to CrabCon 2021 and also to this presentation on strawberry hermit crabs, which happens to feature my own, whose name is Barry Manilow. Enjoy. So to begin, it only makes sense to tell you how I came into possession of Barry, and that happened at the very first CrabCon in Lockport, New York back in 2019. His adoption was actually prearranged with someone else in our organization, Land Hermit Crab Owners Society, who had taken him in as a rescue and needed to rehome him. And since we both happened to be going to New York to retrieve our 2018 captive bred babies from Mary Akers, it also made sense to just simply retrieve him in person at the same time. He's a large crab, and he was large even 2 years ago. So I spent a decent amount of time prior to going to New York to make a tote for him to live in for the weekend, because CrabCon was roughly 3 days and he was going to need to live in temporary digs for that long. So I ended up getting a 10-gallon tote, one that had a self-locking lid, and basically I just outfitted it with the necessities. So he had a heat mat, he had a thin layer of play sand substrate, he had something for climbing, he had some moss for hiding, and of course he had his food and water dishes. He was actually very good. I kind of expected him to be a little bit more stressed than he acted, but he was pretty mellow for that entire 3-day adventure, and also for the 5-hour car ride that we had home at the end. So he was really a rock star. And in regards to his name, he came to me with the name Barry Manilow, which pays homage to Barry Manilow, the singer, and simply because it's both fitting and clever, I opted to keep it. So as mentioned in a previous slide, Barry is actually quite a big boy. He's about the size of my palm, and because of that, he needs a fairly big house. So he's currently living in a 55-gallon tank with 3 Ecuadorian crab roommates. They're all roughly golf ball in size, although one is a little bit smaller. They all get along great. They always have for the last 2 years. There's been no aggression, no pecking order establishment or anything like that I've witnessed anyway. They've all been pretty mellow with each other. And basically, I have them housed together because of their status as exotics, which means for, our definition here in the United States, they're crabs that are non-native. They don't have any distribution here in the U.S., naturally speaking. And 2, exotic crabs, as we'll talk about here in a few slides, also are a bit more sensitive to their environment, fluctuations within it, and they have some more specialized care requirements. Whereas purple pinchers, which are the ones that we're most commonly familiar with here in the United States, purple pinchers do have a bit of a distribution in select areas in southern Florida. And as mentioned, those are the ones that we're mostly familiar with in our hobby here in the States. And, as we also know as members of the Land Hermit Crab Owner Society, those crabs, and strawberry crabs too for that matter, any crabs that are purchased are all wild caught, and that's something that our collective group is working to change. Here are just a couple photos of Barry with his current roommates, the 3 Ecuadorian crabs that he lives with and has lived with for the last 2 years. At one point he did actually have a couple purple pincher roommates, but I eventually took those out and put them back in the purple pincher tank. And so now, as mentioned, Barry just currently lives with 3 E-crabs. So here we can see Barry with one of his purple pincher roommates before I took that crab out and put it back in the purple pincher tank. But as you can see, they're just hanging out together. Everybody's getting along just fine. So here we have further proof that the cork ground is Barry's favorite spot, because here are 2 images with him in it, which is where he's usually to be found. And in the first photo, you can see once again there's evidence of all 3 of his E-crab roommates, with a couple of them in the cork ground with him. And bottom of a cork ground is usually where I find him sleeping during the day. That tends to be his spot of choice. And in the second photo there, you can see him climbing out of his cork ground with one of his roommates perched on the edge. So before we move on, here are 2 final photos of Barry showing him interacting with one of his tank mates, who at this point is wearing a different shell. Piggyback rides, those happen fairly frequently in the tank and are always kind of fun to watch. And 2, that shell that Barry's sitting on, which you can see a little bit better in the second photo, is a fox shell, and I didn't expect him to take it. It's in there just, I guess, for environmental stimulation, if you will, but one day he actually did try that on and wear it for part of the day, but he very quickly went back into the shell that he's currently in. Ah, yes, the million-dollar question, does he play well with others? And the answer to that, as I mentioned before, is he absolutely plays well with others. In the 2 years that I've had him, I've seen no aggression coming either from him or going toward him. In fact, he's actually probably the most mild-mannered of all of my hermit crabs. You know, he's perfectly content to share spaces with his roommates. That includes, you know, sleeping spaces, eating spaces, food dishes, you know, the pools, and also climbing spaces. And he can often be found actually with his Ecuadorian roommates trailing him, or, you know, they're hanging out together doing whatever they're doing, maybe checking out something new that's been put in the tank. But again, no, they've all gotten along very well together. Something else worth mentioning too in regards to this is that I've kept him with crabs of multiple sizes. He's easily the biggest crab that I have, and he's definitely the biggest crab in that tank. And despite that, he gets along with everyone, regardless of species, regardless of size. And that tends to be true of all to most hermit crabs. They can usually live pretty well together without issue if there are enough shells and resources, and if their basic needs are being met. The only potential issue, and I included the photo here to be funny, is that Barry tends to be a bit of a wardrobe snob and not necessarily approve of the Ecuadorian crabs' wardrobe. So here we can see him sitting in their particular shell shop in the tank, and he has unloaded his brown frowns, which is, you know, one of our coined terms for crab poop, all over them in a show of his disapproval. So the second part to the question asked on the previous slide is, does he play well with me? And the answer to that is yes, he actually does. I will preface this, however, by saying that our organization does not recommend handling crabs unless it's necessary. And that's for a couple reasons, actually. One of those reasons that we consider them to be hands-off pets is because picking them up and handling them stresses them. In the wild, they're prey animals. They're used to being eaten by other things. So you can see how very easily, you know, each time we pick one of them up, they might take that to mean they're about to be eaten. And that's going to cause undue stress because obviously we're not going to eat them. So that's one reason why we advocate not handling them. The other reason that we advocate for that is because they require humidity to breathe. And any time spent outside of a tank setting, unless, you know, the keeper lives in a tropical climate with adequate humidity levels, they're deprived of that humidity that they require to breathe, and it becomes uncomfortable for them. So when you see people, for example, letting their crabs out of the tank to walk around on furniture or on the floor or on a bed or even just, you know, across a hand or an arm, and they suggest that, you know, the crab enjoys being out exploring. Look at him go, look at him run. That's actually a stress response. That's not, you know, a sign of a confident, happy crab. That's a sign of a crab that's stressed, that needs to feel safe, that needs its humidity levels to be increased and to be put back in the tank so it can be in that environment. But nevertheless, it is okay to handle them very quickly, to, you know, perform a quick wellness check. And we might do that after a molt, for example, which is when I typically handle my crabs. When they first come back from a molt, you know, I'll remove them quickly just to look them over to make sure their limbs look fine, that everything regenerated the way that it needed to, and then I return them to the tank. So again, quick wellness checks are okay, but, you know, really nothing any longer than that. I do treat my crabs as hands-off pets. But again, as far as his interactions with me go, Barry is easily my most mild-mannered crab. He moves very slowly and deliberately when he's outside the tank. He has never pinched me, thankfully, because he's huge. And, you know, he's never threatened to pinch. He's never, you know, opened a claw at me, raised a claw at me, or anything like that. So as a result, and truth be told, I fear him pinching me significantly less than I do fear pinching from his roommates or from my purple pinchers. So here are just a couple pictures of wellness checks that Barry has gone through after he's come up from a molt. And I included them just so you can get an idea of his size and his general demeanor. So before we move on, here are two final photos of Barry during wellness checks. And in the image on the left, Please know that I had politely asked him to unhand that stick so that I could take him out of the tank and have a good look at him. And he said, nay, I will not unhand the stick. So it ended up coming out of the tank with him. Since he was back from a molt, I was happy to see him. I didn't really want to argue. So that's the reason that there's a stick in that photo with him there. But that is Barry's most recent molt. So that's what he actually looks like now. And that's the shell that he's currently wearing too. In the image on the right, that one really just shows him hanging out of his shell a little bit more. So you get a good look at his back in addition to his legs. So how active is he? Well, in short, I have no way of knowing his age, but I will say this, in terms of his activity level, he is the hermit crab equivalent of a human toddler. Strawberry crabs in general have something of a reputation for being tank wreckers because they're very active by nature, and Barry is no different from that rule. He's a very, very active crab. He tends to be active both day and night. He'll take breaks in between whenever he wants to sleep, but he is active during the day and at night as well. And one of his favorite things to do is to destroy the nice smooth sand that I have prepared for him and his roommates. He likes to dig through it. He likes to tunnel through it. He likes to pile it in anything that he possibly can. So digging is one of his favorite activities. He also equally enjoys climbing. Besides that, he's got a very curious personality, so he really just loves to explore anything in his tank. As a result of that, I typically rearrange things and switch out tank decor every few months. Barry also enjoys just, as I put it, doing laps at ground level. But like any crab, he thrives in a stimulating environment. He likes to have things to do. Crabs like to explore. They're curious. They like to check things out to see if they can climb on them, eat them, burrow into them, or whatever. So, unlike other animals, they actually like a little bit of change, and it's important to keep them happy. In particular, Barry really, really likes dry moss pits. In those, I typically include things for him to forage. That can be anything from chips of safe bark and safe wood, to dried flowers that are safe, to chunks of cuttlebone, and he actually really, really likes cuttlebone. If you've never tried cuttlebone with your crabs, give it a go. You can find it in the bird section of any big box store or pet store. Just make sure that you get one that doesn't have any added ingredients or isn't flavored, just a plain white cuttlebone, but it's a great source of calcium. It doesn't mold, it lasts forever, and crabs typically love it, and Barry really, really loves his. But in addition to moss pits that have stuff that he can, dig around and forage for, his most favorite spot is probably the cork rounds that are in his tank, stuffed with moss. He likes to sleep in those. He's also really fond of finding millet sprays tucked into corners or out-of-the-way places, and just any safe, pest-free wood that he can simultaneously eat and climb will make him very, very happy. When I say, too, that I find myself rearranging and switching out their tank decor every few months, there's something that I need to mention that goes along with that, and that is do such things, rearrange at surface level only when you've got crabs that are molting underneath the substrate. You don't want to disturb the sub, when you've got crabs down, and that includes pulling things out of it or wedging, new decor into it, simply because doing that can collapse or otherwise disturb the molting caves that crabs prepare for themselves. And you don't want to do that because that can harm the crab during its molt, or it can actually kill it. So anytime that you go to rearrange your tank, or you want to rearrange your tank, you'll only want to do that and involve the substrate at any level if all of your crabs are above ground. So if you've got any that are below ground molting, or that you suspect are molting, any crabs that are below ground, do that rearranging at the surface level only. So we'll call this the Ministry of Silly Walks, after the Monty Python sketch of the same name. But as the previous slide mentions, Barry's really fond of doing laps around the tank at ground level, and sometimes he involves the front glass when he does that, and he actually looks pretty goofy when he's kind of half on the substrate and half on the glass. So I just wanted to include a few photos of what he looks like and how silly he indeed looks when he's doing this. So molting is something that is unique to every crab, so here I can really only speak to Barry's particular schedule, but in the 2 years that I've had him, he has molted with me successfully each time, a total of 4 times, and as I work on this presentation and say this, he's actually down for molt number 5. He's pretty regular about it. I have no way of knowing his true age, and the fact that he's a large crab isn't a reliable indicator of his age or that he's an old crab or anything like that. But I will say a couple things in regards to his molt schedule. One of them is that he doesn't remain subterranean for very long at all. Normally we think that larger crabs are going to take longer to molt, they're going to be down longer, maybe 6 months or more. And in a lot of cases that's true, but so far that actually hasn't been my experience with Barry. The 4 times previously that he's molted, he's been down for 1 to 2 months on average, and I keep track on a calendar, so I know when he goes down, I know when he comes back up. And 1 month has been the shortest amount of time that he spent molting, and 2 months has been the longest. The other thing that I will say is because strawberry crabs are more sensitive to their environment in general, his particular molts make me especially nervous, but so far he's been a champ. Fingers crossed for a successful 5th molt. I'm pretty happy that he's made it through 4 since he's been with me. There is one time, however, and it happened this past December, where I actually had to dig for him and also for his tank mates who were also down. And while I'll also be very quick to say that our group recommends that we never dig for a buried crab in general, there are times when it becomes necessary. One of those times would be, for example, in the case of, a pest infestation, whether you get ants in your tank or, some other pest in significant serious numbers, pests that can harm your crabs. Mold would be another example, or a flood that results from excess water accumulating in the substrate. So what happened? Why did I have to break the cardinal rule about digging? Well, in the case of Barry's tank, what happened was that too much water was accumulating in the substrate because those crabs are very active and messy. And I obviously needed to correct that situation before it became life-threatening for the crabs that were down. And one of those at the time happened to be Barry. So what I had to do was, again, dig for him. And I did that very, very slowly and gently, thin layer of substrate by thin layer of substrate, until I found him. And he had been down for a few weeks at that point already. So when I discovered him, and mind you, I was terrified because I had no idea what I was going to find. I didn't know if he was going to be in the process of a molt, if it was going to be finished, if he had passed away, or what had happened. So the whole process was incredibly nerve-wracking. But when I did find him, he was literally sitting in his molting cave, which was about the size of a small grapefruit. And he was there, tucked in, literally eating his exoskeleton. And he looked and felt sufficiently hardened when I lifted him up, but because he hadn't yet returned to the surface on his own, and I didn't want to force him to do that before he was ready, I ended up isolating him, and I did that in a separate container within the larger tank so that he could finish his business in peace. So this is Barry's isolation tank, and really all it is an opaque plastic shoebox. It's open, it doesn't have a lid, and that's because I opted to include it in the main tank. There was room for it there, so I put it there just so he could have the same heat and humidity that he was always accustomed to, and I hoped, of course, that that would help him not be as stressed as he finished things up. But as you can see, this is really just a very basic setup. There's a play sand substrate. It's very thin, nothing that he can burrow into. Water dishes, one for salt, one for fresh. Food items are in there. Most importantly, you can see toward the upper right-hand corner, there are a couple leg pieces left of his exoskeleton that he has yet to eat. But by that point, he'd finished the vast majority of it, so I had started introducing different foods as well. There's a pecan in there. There's a chunk of cuttlebone because he loves cuttlebone, as I mentioned before. In the food dish, there are worm castings, green sand, and dried baby shrimp, which he really likes. And the moss pile is there to give him just, some added security, a place to dig into, a place to hide in. And if you look closely, you can see a pearly white dot in the center of it, and that is actually part of his shell. So when I took the photo, he was tucked in for the day, taking a snooze. So, but yeah, this is what his isolation container looked like. So in the words of Tom Hanks in the movie Forrest Gump, Lieutenant Dan, a.k.a. Barry, got new legs. And because crabs need to eat their shed exo in order to meet nutritional and recovery needs, Barry, like any other crab, needed to finish what he started when he was in his molt cave. And he really hadn't eaten most of his exo by that point. It was still largely intact. So it was necessary for me to, when I isolated him, also keep, all of that exoskeleton in there with him so that he could eat it. And because all of this happened around Christmas, I jokingly told people that Barry got new legs for Christmas and then ate his old ones for dinner and had leftovers to boot for several days afterward, in fact. And he also declared himself to be the best snack ever. In the end, he ate all but part of one leg. There was just one leg segment left. And even though a lot of crabs tend to not eat their big claw, he actually did eat his big claw, which surprised me. But obviously, he wanted to do that, so he did it. And he stayed in his isolation container for the vast majority of 2 weeks. I want to say it was 12 or 13 days. And even though he had finished eating his exo by then, and he was sufficiently hardened, and he was active and moving around, I opted to keep him in there just to give him some extra time to reestablish his equilibrium, or, a simpler way of putting that would be to say, just to give him some time to get his wits about him before he re-entered society, so to speak. I knew he was ready to return to the main tank when he actually did that for himself because, again, on the 12th or 13th day, I got up one morning and all of his moss, which you had seen in the previous slide's photo, all of that moss had been piled on top of his food dish, kind of prison break style, and Barry was gone. And when I looked for him, I found him asleep in a cork ground clear over on the other side of the tank. So, I had to take my cue from him. He was done. He was ready. He found a way to let himself out, and he did. So there you have it. Here we have two photos of Barry actually eating his exoskeleton while he's in his isolation container. And one of the things that I want to point out here is that if you look at the image on the left closely, you can see that his exoskeleton is hollow and empty on the inside. That's how we know that it's, exoskeleton as opposed to an actual limb, for example. And the reason why I mention that is because we often have folks or members who notice limbs lying on top of the substrate in their crab tank, and they wonder if their crab is dropping limbs as a stress response, for example, or if the crab has pulled a surface molt. So the easiest way to tell is to check out those limbs and see if they're hollow or if they contain meat. If they contain meat, then you've got a crab who is dropping limbs for whatever reason, usually stress. If they're hollow, on the other hand, then you've got a crab who has pulled a surface molt. But the other differentiating factor there, too, is that crabs don't typically, if ever, molt one leg at a time. They're going to molt their entire body, every moltable part. I think I just invented a word there, multiple. Regardless, they're going to molt their entire body at once. So when that happens, you're going to see what looks like almost a duplicate crab lying on the substrate or hanging out of the shell in front of the actual crab, which is tucked way back into the shell. But again, the way to determine for sure is to pick up the limb and see if it's empty or not. All about Barry's pants. What does he like to wear? What shells does he prefer? The answer to that is turbos. He's very much a turbo guy. And the one that he's wearing in the photo is what's called an African turbo. We also call it a Sarmaticus shell after its Latin name. And this is the shell that he was wearing when I adopted him 2 years ago. It's also the shell that he has kept returning to, even after molts and even after having tried on others. So it's comfortable. He likes it, which is interesting because even though it's got a round opening, and that's what he seems to prefer and what purple pinchers also prefer, I can't get any of my purple pinchers to wear one of these. So they're beautiful shells, and I'm happy that I've got at least one crab in one of them. So as far as I'm concerned, he can wear it for as long as he likes. In these two photos, we see the other shells that Barry has worn over the couple years that I've had him. The one on the left is a fox shell, and it's not one that I ever expected him to try on. It was actually in their tank just to give them something to play with and roll around with, just for some added, environmental stimulation, if you will. But he did put it on. He wore it around for a few hours, maybe half a day, and then he went back into his original shell, which didn't surprise me a bit because that fox shell just didn't fit him well and didn't look comfortable. The one on the right is a turbo that's been heavily polished, and he was actually in that one for a year. And what's noticeable about that one is, as you can see, it's got a very large hole in it. And despite that, he didn't really seem to care. That hole kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger. It started out pretty small, and I wasn't concerned about it, but the more it grew, the more concerned I got. I was afraid that, eventually the shell wouldn't hold water or that it would scratch his abdomen. But again, he stayed in it for a year, so he was happy with it. He took it down for 2 different molts without a problem. It didn't scratch his abdomen at all that I could tell, and you can see his abdomen through it very clearly. So he's got a nice looking butt, and he wanted to show it off apparently, but it never did seem to hurt him or irritate him. And 2, it must not have refused to hold water, because he would have changed out of it if it was a shell that didn't hold water. So yeah, for whatever reason, he kept it, and he wore it, and he liked it, and he just enjoyed airing out the goods, apparently. So after having talked about what life has been like with Barry for the last couple years, I would be remiss to not also just talk about some general strawberry crab care tips, just some general information, if you will, about their needs and preferences. And to start with that, I'll lead in by saying that straws are not beginner crabs. Their needs are a little bit more specific. One of the reasons why is because here in the U.S. they're considered to be an exotic species, which means they need a little bit higher heat and humidity. We recommend a temperature of 85 and a humidity percentage of 85. And straws tend to be a little bit more sensitive to fluctuations in changes in those levels of both heat and humidity. So when it comes to caring for them, keeping their internal tank environment as consistent and stable as possible is what we need to go for there. As well, they also prefer deeper and larger pools, and they're a little bit more dependent on quality salt water. 2, substrate-wise, even though, they live just fine in, what our group recommends, which is the 5-to-1 ratio of place sand to eco-earth, substrate depth is a little bit different for them. 10 to 12 inches is a good starting point, and that's what I keep Barry at, mainly because the tank that he's in, which is a 55-gallon, isn't going to support much more than that. But, again, 10 to 12 inches is a good starting point for a substrate depth for straws. They like it a little bit deeper in that regard. 2, and as I mentioned before, they're a more active species. Barry's active day and night, and they've got, as I also mentioned, a reputation for being a tank wrecker. They like to move things around, they like to explore, they like to dig and tunnel, they like to rearrange everything, basically. So that's something to consider as well. But at the same time, they can also live with other species. Like I mentioned, Barry has lived with both purple pinchers and Ecuadorians, or E's, and he has been fine with both of them, including crabs of different sizes. So yeah, they can get along with other species. As far as food goes, their dietary needs are, roughly the same as for other species, although color-enhancing foods are especially good for them. And as I've learned from this group, a little bit higher percentage of seafood is good for them too. So shrimp, krill, crayfish, lobster, crab, including the exo of those things. So yeah, but here there's a quick guide to food and nutritional needs for those of you who are interested. So I would also be remiss to not talk about acquiring a strawberry crab or strawberry crabs. For starters, they're a highly sought after species. A lot of people want them, but unfortunately, they're very difficult to come by, especially reputably here in the United States. One thing that we definitely do not recommend that people do is purchase them online. We know from experience that many sites and sellers who initially appear to be reputable and trustworthy are very good at being scam artists. And oftentimes, crabs that are purchased online, including whether or not they're straws or some other species, but regardless, again, a lot of times, these crabs arrive from these places already deceased, or, the seller will send the wrong species, or, these folks will take people's money and never deliver a crab. So again, our group recommends not purchasing strawberries or really any crabs online for those reasons. We also don't advocate purchasing any crabs, again, strawberries included, from pet stores or beach shops. These crabs have been treated incredibly cruelly, and by the time that they get to pet stores and beach shops and any other places where they're sold en masse, they're already stressed, they're already sick, or they're already dying by the time that they arrive in these places. And with strawberries, for example, being, more sensitive to environmental fluctuations and changes to begin with, they are almost certainly in very rough health if and when they're ever found in stores or beach shops, maybe even more so health-wise than, purple pinchers or Ecuadorians. Regardless, if you're not already aware, more information about what wild-caught crabs, which all in the pet trade currently are, and what this group is trying to change, more information about what they're put through can be found at the link below. As a result, ultimately, our group believes that adoption and rehoming are the best options, and we actually have a very successful and comprehensive adoption program. The link for it is included here if you would like to check it out. But even though strawberry crabs in particular rarely come through our adoption program, again, this is the option that we advocate for, not just for strawberries, but for any crab in general. If you'd like more information on strawberries or just more information in general on crab care, the first link here is to our group's newbies guide on hermit crabs, which will get you started with everything from housing, tank-wise, to heat and humidity, to their diet, recommended food guidelines, things of that nature. It's a little bit more, again, general, but much of the info there applies to strawberry crabs just as it does other species. On the other hand, if you're looking for more information just on strawberries, you can always check out our group on Facebook, Land Hermit Crab Owners Society. The link is included here as well. The easiest way to do that is just to simply use the group search feature, which is indicated by the magnifying glass icon, and type in strawberry crab or strawberry crab care or something to that effect, whatever you might be looking for there, and loads of information and additional photos, experiences, care tips, etc. will pop up and be available to you. So there you have it, a couple different places where you can go for further information if you would like it. In closing, here are a few final photos of Barry Manilow. Thanks for watching and listening, and I hope that you all enjoy the rest of CrabCon 2021.
Now it all seems light years away, and now you know I can't smile without you. I can't smile without you. I can't laugh and I can't sing. I'm finding it hard to do anything. You see, I feel sad when you're sad. I feel glad when you're glad. If you only knew what I'm going through, I just can't smile. Now some people say happiness takes so very long to find. Well, I'm finding it hard leaving your love behind me. And you see, I can't smile without you. I can't smile without you. I can't laugh and I can't sing. I'm finding it hard to do anything. You see, I feel glad when you're glad. I feel sad when you're sad. If you only knew what I'm going through, I just can't smile without you.
The Hermit Crab by Carter Goodrich. The hermit crab in this story didn't set out to be a hero, and he wasn't particularly brave. He was, actually, very shy. Whenever all his neighbors would get together, the hermit crab was happy to linger just out of sight. If anyone did happen to notice him, he would become terribly nervous and start to fidget. And then, if they should happen to say something like, "Hi," or "How's it going?" He would disappear deep into his shell without saying a word. Early one morning, just when the hermit crab's neighbors were sitting down to have breakfast, a large wooden contraption fell out of the sky and headed right for them. It bounced and clattered and finally came to rest smack dab in the middle of their town square. The hermit crab was off by himself, poking around in the sand looking for something good to eat. What in the world is it? The starfish asked. Some sort of new restaurant, the lobster replied. He was sniffing at the tasty aroma that was coming from inside. Stay back, the bluefish warned. I've seen things like this before. It smells like there's something good inside to eat, but don't be fooled. It's just a trap. Hey, said the striped bass. Where's the flounder? Has anyone seen the flounder? Nobody had. Meanwhile, not too far away, the hermit crab had forgotten all about looking for food. He was sitting perfectly still on top of a rock, looking down at the most beautiful shell he'd ever seen. Very carefully, the hermit crab crept over to the fancy new shell, saw that it was empty, and decided right then and there to move in. It's even got moving parts, he thought to himself. He felt very happy. Back in the center of town, no one was happy. Help! Cried a voice from beneath the contraption. It's the flounder, the lobster yelled. He's trapped underneath the restaurant. It's not a restaurant, the bluefish said. It's a trap. The flounder needs our help. Yeah, the crab shouted. The flounder needs our help. Okay, the lobster said. Go ahead. But if that thing is some kind of a trap, I am not going near it. And then nobody said anything because they all felt the same way. Wait a minute, the striped bass whispered. Who is that? The hermit crab came stumbling out of the seaweed forest, right into the center of town. What is this? He thought. He didn't notice the flounder, but he did notice the good smells, and that reminded him how hungry he was. He walked around the contraption, grabbing it and giving it a shake. He wanted to get into where that good smell was coming from. Everyone watched the mysterious stranger from their hiding places. Look, whispered the starfish. He's trying to rescue the flounder. Who is that? Yeah, the crab shouted. Who is that? That, cried the lobster, that is our brave champion, our hero, come to save us. And then all of a sudden the contraption moved. Then it moved again. And finally it began to float back into the sky. The hermit crab was still clinging to its side. He let go at last and gently drifted back down. And settled right on top of the flounder. The flounder, now free, tried to thank the mysterious stranger, but the hermit crab drew himself up into his new shell. Everyone came rushing out of their hiding places, cheering their hero. This excitement was just too much for the poor hermit crab. He curled up even tighter inside his new shell. Great, he thought. Now I'll never get anything to eat. The hermit crab's neighbors quickly organized a parade and carried their hero to the highest rock, where they carefully set him down for all to see. Then they celebrated late into the night. The hermit crab remained hidden from view. As soon as it grew quiet, The hermit crab slid out of the fancy new shell. He tiptoed past his snoring neighbors, back through the seaweed forest, until at last he found his worn-out old shell, right where he'd left it. He wriggled back inside and soon fell fast asleep. The next day, the hermit crab made his way back into town. There, still perched on top of the highest rock, was the fancy new shell, empty as the day he'd found it. But nobody in the crowd noticed. They were happy to cheer their new hero while the lobster made speech after speech. So the hermit crab settled in, just beyond the edge of the crowd, right where he was most comfortable. He smiled to himself, and he even cheered the fancy new shell. But he cheered very softly, and just a little bit. He didn't want to be noticed. The end.